My husband slapped me when I told him I was pregnant. He thought the force of his hand would erase the child, secure his millions, and put the orphan he married back in her place. He had no idea that the piece of paper he threw at me right after would be the exact blueprint I needed to legally obliterate his entire family. My name is Bethany, and I am 34 years old. For 5 years, I played the grateful charity case in a family of Seattle elites. Today, I am the one who holds all the cards. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. The sound of the slap echoed off the imported Italian marble of our master bathroom. My cheek burned with a sudden searing heat, but I did not bring my hand up to touch it. I just watched the plastic pregnancy test clatter against the floor tiles, the two pink lines facing upward like a glaring accusation. Preston stood over me, his chest heaving under his custom-tailored dress shirt. The charming wealth manager the rest of Seattle adored was gone. In his place stood the man I had secretly known for months, a ruthless narcissist, terrified of losing control. "You think this changes anything?" Preston hissed, his voice bouncing off the vast, sterile walls. "You think trapping me with a kid is going to lock down your access to the family trust?" I gripped the edge of the vanity and pulled myself up slowly. I did not cry. Crying was a weakness I had abandoned long before I met him back in the state-run group homes where I grew up. "I did not trap you, Preston," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "We are married. Pregnancies happen." The heavy oak door of the bedroom swung open. The sharp click of designer heels announced her arrival before she even spoke. Gloria, my mother-in-law, strolled into our private sanctuary. She had used her own key, a boundary she crossed weekly, to remind me that this house, like everything else in my life, ultimately belonged to her. She looked from the red mark spreading across my cheek to the test on the floor, her expression twisting into a sneer of pure disgust. "Did you really think breeding would secure your place in a $3 million estate?" Gloria asked, stepping carefully around the plastic stick as if it carried a disease. She reached into her leather handbag and tossed a thick stack of papers onto the vanity right in front of me. "You are an orphan, Bethany. You belong in the gutter, not in our lineage." I stared at the documents. The header read, "Marital Dissolution Agreement." It was completely drawn up, waiting only for my signature. They had been planning this. The pregnancy just forced their hand early. Gloria had never hidden her contempt for my profession as a high-end estate liquidator and antiquities appraiser. To her, I was just a glorified pawnshop worker who had manipulated her wealthy son. Preston stepped closer, invading my personal space, his breath smelling of the expensive scotch he had been drinking since breakfast. "Here is how this plays out," he said, his tone shifting from rage to calculated business negotiation. "You are going to take $50,000. You are going to go to a private clinic I have already selected, and you are going to get rid of that parasite. Then you sign those papers and disappear. And if I refuse," I asked, looking him dead in the eye. Preston chuckled a cold, lifeless sound. "If you refuse, I will file for divorce tomorrow. I have sworn statements from 3 men who will testify that you have been sleeping with them for money. I will drag your professional reputation through the mud. By the time my lawyers are done with you, you will not be able to get a job evaluating thrift store junk, let alone high-end antiquities. You will be penniless, pregnant, and destroyed." Gloria patted his arm approvingly. "Take the deal, Bethany. It is more charity than you deserve. You should be thanking us for cleaning up your mess." I looked down at the divorce papers. My entire career was built on examining the finest details, authenticating history, and spotting the microscopic flaws that gave away a forgery. As I reached out and picked up the first page of the agreement, my thumb brushed against the thick premium paper stock. I held it at a slight angle, catching the harsh light of the vanity mirror. There it was, a faint embossed watermark stamped directly into the corner of the paper. It was not the logo of Preston's prestigious Seattle law firm. It was the crest of a highly exclusive offshore bank located in the Cayman Islands. My mind raced. Preston was a licensed wealth manager in the United States, under strict federal regulations maintaining undisclosed offshore accounts, especially through shell entities that would use this specific legal stationery, was a massive violation. If his personal divorce papers were drafted on this specific paper, it meant his personal lawyer was operating out of an illegal offshore entity. He was hiding money, a lot of it. I looked back at my husband and my mother-in-law. They thought I was just a desperate girl with no family to protect her. They had no idea they had just handed a trained investigator the exact thread needed to unravel their entire financial empire. "I need time to read this," I said, keeping my eyes cast downward to play the part of the defeated wife. "You have until tomorrow night," Preston said, turning on his heel. "Fix your face. We have Sunday brunch at my mother's house tomorrow. You will smile, and you will not say a word." The next morning required a heavy layer of concealer to hide the dark purple bruise blossoming along my cheekbone. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, practicing the mild, subservient smile that Preston demanded. When we arrived at Gloria's sprawling waterfront estate, the performance began. The grand dining room was suffocatingly opulent. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the massive mahogany table laden with catered pastries and imported champagne. I took my assigned seat at the far end of the table, bracing myself for the usual onslaught of veiled insults. Kelsey, my sister-in-law, swept into the room 20 minutes late. At 31 years old, she had never worked a single day in her life, funded entirely by the family trust that Preston managed. She took her seat and immediately draped a spectacular glittering diamond necklace over her collarbone to ensure everyone noticed it. "Do you like it?" Kelsey asked the room, though her eyes locked directly onto my plain dress. "It cost $100,000. Preston's advice on the market really paid off this quarter. I decided to treat myself." She leaned forward, inspecting my outfit with exaggerated pity. "Did you appraise that dress at a garage sale, Bethany? Or do you just prefer looking like the help?" Preston chuckled, wrapping his arm around my shoulders in a display of marital affection. "My wife prefers the simple things, Kelsey. You know how she grew up." As he spoke, his fingers dug viciously into the bruised muscle near my collarbone. The pain was blinding, a sharp physical warning to keep my mouth shut. I forced my lips to stay curved upward, nodding slightly, as if his abuse was a comforting embrace. But someone was watching. Jamal, Kelsey's husband, sat directly across the table from me. Jamal was a brilliant African-American corporate attorney specializing in financial compliance. He was a man of strict morals who usually kept his head down during these toxic family gatherings to keep the peace. But today his sharp eyes missed nothing. He watched Kelsey boast about her reckless spending with a deep frown. He noticed Preston's white-knuckle grip on my shoulder. And despite my careful makeup, he noticed the slight discoloration on my cheek. Gloria clinked her crystal glass, demanding attention. "We have so much to celebrate," she announced. "Preston is poised to become senior partner at his firm, and Kelsey is elevating our social standing beautifully. We are a family of winners. Everyone else is just fortunate to be in our orbit." I used the toast as an excuse to stand up. "I will go fetch more mimosa pitchers from the kitchen," I offered, playing the servant role Gloria always expected of me. The kitchen was isolated from the dining room, a quiet sanctuary of stainless steel and white marble. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes and letting out a shaky breath, allowing the facade to drop for just a second. The sound of the swinging door made me jump. Jamal stepped into the kitchen. He walked over to the coffee machine, pretending to pour himself a cup, keeping his back to the door just in case anyone followed. "Bethany," he said, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper, "do not sign whatever papers he shoved in your face last night." I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. "How do you know about that?" Jamal kept his eyes on the coffee pot. "I am a corporate attorney, Bethany. I read people for a living, and I read financial filings. Preston's firm has been bleeding cash for 3 consecutive quarters. The market is down, his clients are pulling out, yet Kelsey just bought a $100,000 necklace in cash. Gloria is spending like she owns a small country. The math does not add up. Something is deeply fundamentally wrong with Preston's books." He turned to face me, his expression deadly serious. "I saw him grab you. I see the makeup on your face. He is losing control and he is getting desperate. You are the only one in this family with an actual brain, so I am going to tell you something I noticed when we arrived today. Jamal stepped closer, ensuring we were completely alone. You are an art appraiser. Go into Gloria's private study before we leave today. Look at the Picasso she loves to brag about. Look closely at the brushstrokes. It is a forgery, Bethany. The original is gone. They are liquidating assets quietly, and Preston is going to use you as the scapegoat when the whole house of cards collapses. I waited exactly 2 minutes, counting the seconds in my head to let my heart rate steady. The clinking of crystal glasses and Gloria's booming laughter echoed from the dining room. I slipped out the side door of the kitchen, navigating the sprawling hallway toward the east wing. Gloria's private study was strictly off-limits to everyone, especially the hired help and me. The heavy oak door was locked, but a high-end estate liquidator learns a few practical skills over the years. I pulled a simple hairpin from my updo and slipped it into the vintage brass keyhole. A soft click rewarded my efforts. I slipped inside and gently shut the door behind me. The room smelled of expensive leather and old paper. My eyes locked onto the centerpiece of the room hanging directly above the fireplace. It was a masterpiece, a purported 1932 Picasso that Gloria boasted about at every charity gala in Seattle. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my jeweler's loupe and a miniature ultraviolet flashlight, tools I never left home without. I stepped onto the fireplace hearth and pressed the loupe against my eye, leaning inches from the canvas. Under the harsh beam of the UV light, the truth revealed itself instantly. Genuine oil paint from the 1930s fluoresces with a distinct cloudy greenish-yellow hue due to the aging of the varnish and the specific chemical composition of vintage pigments. This canvas glowed a sharp, bright purple. It was modern synthetic polymer. I adjusted the raking light across the surface. The brushstrokes did not align with the visual texture of the paint. It was a high-resolution giclée print mounted on canvas, meticulously painted over with a clear acrylic medium to simulate the three-dimensional ridges of a master's brush. A brilliant $50,000 forgery meant to replace an $80 million original. My gaze darted around the room. The Ming Dynasty porcelain bowls on the mahogany shelves, the Renaissance bronze statuettes on the desk. I checked them all. The porcelain lacked the characteristic iron rust spots underneath the glaze. The bronzes were artificially patinated with acid, lacking the natural microscopic pitting of century-old metal. The entire room was a movie set. The wealth was a hollow illusion. Jamal was right. The family trust was completely bankrupt. Preston had liquidated his mother's authentic assets to cover the massive bleeding in his wealth management firm, replacing them with impeccable fakes. I clicked off my flashlight and turned toward the door. The brass handle turned violently. I stepped back just as the door swung open. Preston stood in the doorway, his custom Italian suit jacket discarded, his tie loosened. His eyes darted from me to the Picasso above the mantel, then down to the small magnifying loupe still clutched in my palm. The charming facade he wore in the dining room vanished, replaced by the cornered, dangerous look of a predator whose territory had been breached. "What are you doing in here?" Preston demanded, his voice dropping to a menacingly quiet register. "I was looking for an aspirin," I lied smoothly, sliding the loupe into my pocket with a practiced flick of my wrist. The morning sickness hit me suddenly. "I did not want to cause a scene in front of your mother's guests." Preston closed the door behind him. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He grabbed my wrist, his fingers digging into my skin with the exact same brutal pressure he had used at the breakfast table. "You do not get to wander around this house, Bethany. You do not touch my mother's things." He yanked me toward the door, dragging me down the hallway and out the front entrance before I could even grab my coat. We got into his car in absolute silence. The drive back to our $2 million estate was suffocating. Preston's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. His paranoia was fully ignited. He knew my profession. He knew I had the expertise to spot a forgery from across a room. He could not risk me piecing together the timeline of his financial ruin. The moment the front door of our house clicked shut behind us, Preston turned on me. "Hand over your wallet." I stood frozen in the foyer. "Excuse me?" Your wallet, Bethany. Now. Preston held out his hand, his eyes burning with absolute malice. I unzipped my clutch and handed it to him. He pulled out my 2 platinum credit cards, the ones tied to our joint accounts. He took a pair of heavy brass scissors from the entryway table and snapped both cards perfectly in half, letting the plastic shards fall onto the hardwood floor. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb swiping rapidly across the screen. I just removed your digital access to the joint checking and savings accounts. You have 0 withdrawal privileges. I am also calling the security gate. Your biometric access is revoked. You can leave the neighborhood, but you will not be allowed back in. He reached into my purse one last time and pulled out the key fob to my Range Rover. He dropped it into his own pocket. You think you can snoop around my family's private affairs? Preston sneered, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating off him. You think you can trap me with a pregnancy and play detective in my mother's house? You are an orphan who grew up wearing donated clothes. I am putting you right back where you started. You have no money, no car, and no way out. You will rot in this house until you sign those divorce papers and handle that medical procedure. Preston turned his back on me, grabbed his golf clubs from the hall closet, and walked out the front door. He locked the deadbolt from the outside. I stood alone in the grand foyer of my luxurious prison. A normal woman would have collapsed onto the floor in tears. A normal woman would have begged, panicked, or surrendered. But I was not a normal woman. Growing up in the state foster system taught me one fundamental rule of survival. Never rely on the people who claim to protect you, and always build your own safety net. I did not panic. I calmly walked up the sweeping staircase to my private library. The room was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves containing thousands of volumes on art history, antiquities, and estate valuation. I walked directly to the 3rd shelf on the left wall and pulled out a heavy leather-bound encyclopedia of Renaissance architecture. I opened the cover. The pages were hollowed out. Inside the secret compartment lay a prepaid burner phone, an encrypted hardware wallet, and a small notebook containing routing numbers to offshore limited liability companies that Preston had absolutely no idea existed. For 5 years, I had worked as a top-tier appraiser for the wealthiest families in the Pacific Northwest. I had authenticated estates worth hundreds of millions. I had quietly taken my highest consulting fees in untraceable assets and stored them in independent entities. Preston thought I was a penniless charity case because I let him manage his own inflated wealth while I silently built an empire in the shadows. I turned on the burner phone and dialed a secure international number. It rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered on the other end. "David, it is Bethany," I said, walking toward the window to watch Preston's sports car speed out of the neighborhood. "Bethany," the voice replied, laced with respect. "It has been a while. What do you have for me?" "I have the authentic 17th century Ming Dynasty vase we discussed last year, the one from the private Seattle collection. I am ready to move it to a private auction immediately. I need the transaction expedited and fully anonymous." "Consider it done," David said. "Where should I wire the advance funds?" "Wire the first 200,000 to my independent LLC. I instructed, my voice hard and absolute. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into the hollowed book. Preston thought he had cut off my air supply. He had no idea I owned the entire atmosphere. He wanted a war of attrition, but I was about to buy the battlefield. I placed the burner phone back into the hollowed-out encyclopedia and slid it onto the shelf. The house was dead quiet. Preston had left for the Oak Ridge Country Club, a Friday tradition he never missed. He spent hours there smoking cigars and networking with Seattle's elite, securing the very wealth he was secretly draining. I had a narrow window of exactly 3 hours before he would return for dinner. It was time to find out exactly how deep his financial grave was dug. I walked downstairs to his home office. The door was locked with a biometric keypad, but Preston was a creature of habit and hubris. He believed technology was infallible, completely ignoring the human element. 2 days ago, I had watched him wipe the keypad clean with a microfiber cloth. Yesterday, I dusted it with a fine layer of translucent appraisal powder used for detecting fingerprints on antique lacquer. I pressed the small button to illuminate the pad. 3 numbers glowed slightly brighter where the powder had been disturbed by his finger. 8, 0, and 5. Preston was obsessed with status. I knew his ultimate goal, the number he constantly boasted he would hit before he turned 40. $850 million. I punched in 850000000. The heavy door clicked and swung open. I stepped inside and locked it behind me. The office was a monument to his ego. Dark cherry wood paneling, leather chairs, and framed accolades lining the walls. I bypassed it all and went straight to his sleek desktop computer. He had left it in sleep mode. A password prompt appeared. Again, narcissism is a predictable flaw. I typed in the exact date he made junior partner at his wealth management firm. Access granted. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed his standard client folders and dug into the encrypted drives. I had learned enough about digital forensics during my estate liquidation training to know how to spot hidden directories. Deep in the system, masked under a folder labeled Offshore Compliance, I found the master ledgers. I inserted a high-capacity flash drive I had purchased months ago for my own business backups. As the files began to transfer, I opened the master spreadsheet. The numbers on the screen were staggering. I scrolled through row after row of red ink. Jamal was not just right. He had underestimated the sheer scale of the devastation. The prestigious family trust, the untouchable fortune that Gloria paraded around Seattle high society, was completely bankrupt. The accounts were drained to zero. To fund Gloria's insatiable spending habits and Kelsey's lavish lifestyle, Preston had been running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He was actively embezzling tens of millions of dollars from his most elite American clients, shuffling funds through Cayman Island shell companies to cover the family's bleeding debts. My eyes scanned a recent entry. $3 million transferred from a prominent state senator's retirement account directly to a holding company. That holding company had then wired the exact same amount to a luxury shipyard. Kelsey's new yacht was entirely funded by stolen political money. If the Securities and Exchange Commission caught even a whiff of this, Preston would not just lose his license, he would face decades in federal prison. The progress bar on my file transfer hit 80%. I watched the green line inch forward, my pulse thrumming in my ears. 85%, 90%. Then the unmistakable sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway shattered the silence. Preston was back early. Panic flared, but I forced it down. I could not cancel the transfer now. I needed this evidence to protect myself. I listened to the heavy thud of the front door opening and slamming shut. Preston's angry footsteps echoed in the marble foyer. He was marching straight toward the office. 95%. I stared at the screen, silently willing it to move faster. Preston's voice boomed down the hallway, yelling at the housekeeper about a misplaced dry cleaning delivery. 99%. The transfer complete notification chimed softly. I yanked the flash drive from the port, shoved it deep into my pocket, and slapped the monitor shut just as the biometric lock on the office door beeped. There was no time to reach the door. I dove under the massive mahogany desk, pulling my knees to my chest and holding my breath. The door swung open. Preston stormed into the room, muttering curses under his breath. I saw his expensive Italian leather shoes pace back and forth in front of the desk. He threw a stack of mail onto the surface above my head. The wood groaned under the impact. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. If he sat down, his knees would hit me. If he looked down, it was over. I pressed a hand over my mouth, suppressing the urge to gasp for air. Preston paced to the window, opened a drawer on a filing cabinet, and pulled something out. The clinking of glass told me he was pouring a drink. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, sipping his scotch. The silence in the room was suffocating. Then his phone rang. He answered it on the second ring. "What do you want?" Kelsey Preston snapped. "No, I cannot transfer another $50,000 to your account today. The market is volatile right now. Just put the shopping on hold for a week." He sighed heavily, pacing back toward the door. "I am handling the Bethany situation. She has no money and no car. She will sign the papers by tomorrow night. Just keep Jamal off my back. He asked too many questions." Preston walked out of the office, slamming the door behind him. I stayed under the desk for another 5 minutes, making absolutely sure the hallway was clear. When I finally crawled out, my muscles ached from the tension, but a cold, victorious smile spread across my face. Preston thought he was starving me into submission. He had no idea I had just downloaded the key to his federal indictment. I waited until Preston's heavy footsteps faded down the hallway and the front door slammed shut before I finally exhaled. My lungs burned as I slid out from under the massive mahogany desk. My hands were trembling, but my grip on the flash drive inside my pocket was absolute. I wiped the biometric scanner clean with my sleeve, ensuring no trace of my presence remained, and slipped out of the office. I moved silently up the sweeping staircase and retreated to the master bedroom. It was time to play the part they expected. I sat on the edge of the California king bed, letting my shoulders slump and staring blankly at the silk wallpaper. I needed them to believe they had broken me. I needed them to think their financial chokehold had completely suffocated my will to fight. Less than an hour later, the heavy oak door swung open without so much as a knock. Gloria stood in the threshold, her designer heels sinking into the plush carpet. She did not look at me with pity. She looked at me the way one looks at an infestation. She carried a heavy canvas duffel bag, the handles gripped tightly in her manicured hands. She walked over to the bed and dropped the bag directly onto the mattress next to me. The heavy zipper fell open, revealing thick stacks of $100 bills bound in bank bands. I stared at the cash, keeping my expression perfectly vacant. "There is $100,000 in untraceable cash right there," Gloria said, her voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. "Preston is about to be named senior partner at his firm. He needs a pedigree wife who understands how our world operates, not a charity case dragging him down." I looked from the money up to her cold, calculating eyes. "You want me to take this and leave?" "I want you to get rid of the parasite growing inside you," Gloria stated, her tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "There is a private clinic downtown. They do not ask questions, and they respect discretion. Take care of the medical procedure, sign the divorce papers Preston gave you, and take the bag. With this kind of money, someone of your background can start over nicely, in some flyover state where you belong." I kept my face perfectly smooth, masking the absolute disgust churning in my stomach. She was talking about her own grandchild as if it were an inconvenient stain on a luxury rug. But anger would not serve me right now. Compliance was my best camouflage. I needed her to believe her cruelty was working perfectly. "I understand," I said quietly, reaching out and pulling the heavy canvas bag toward me. "I will take care of it today." Gloria smiled, a tight, terrifying stretching of her lips. "Good girl. You finally understand your place. See yourself out before Preston gets home for dinner." She turned on her heel and marched out of the room, leaving the door wide open behind her. As soon as the sound of her car engine faded down the driveway, I zipped up the duffel bag and grabbed my purse. Preston had taken my car keys and cut up my credit cards, assuming I was trapped. He forgot that cash was the ultimate skeleton key. I walked out the front door, hailed a premium rideshare service using my secret burner phone, and left the gated community behind. I did not go to the discreet abortion clinic Gloria had demanded. Instead, I directed the driver to the most prestigious maternal fetal medicine hospital in downtown Seattle. I walked up to the reception desk and paid for a VIP same-day appointment entirely in cash. I registered under my maiden name, ensuring that no medical records would ever cross Preston's desk or ping his insurance network. I sat in the plush waiting room surrounded by glossy magazines and soft instrumental music, my hand resting gently on my flat stomach. I was entirely alone, facing a complex pregnancy orchestrated by a monster, but I felt a fierce protective instinct rising within me. This child would never know the cruelty of the family whose blood it shared. They honestly thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought I was fleeing with my tail between my legs, clutching their dirty money as my only lifeline. They were entirely wrong. A nurse called my false name and led me down a pristine white corridor to an examination room. The doctor, a warm woman with kind eyes, applied the cold gel to my abdomen and moved the ultrasound wand across my skin. The rhythmic, rapid sound of a heartbeat filled the small room, echoing from the machine's speakers. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, a tiny drum beating a rhythm of defiance against the people who wanted it silenced. "Well," the doctor said, her eyes widening slightly as she looked at the monitor, It seems we have a surprise here. My breath caught in my throat. Is everything okay? Is something wrong? Everything is perfectly healthy, she reassured me with a bright smile. But you are going to need a bigger nursery. Congratulations, you are having twins. I stared at the black and white screen, my mind screeching to a sudden violent halt. Two distinct shapes, two heartbeats, twins. The doctor printed out a strip of glossy photos and handed them to me. I took the images with trembling fingers. I was not trembling out of fear or overwhelming maternal emotion. I was trembling because a specific obscure legal clause suddenly flashed through my memory, like a beacon of absolute destruction. During my time authenticating the estate's historical documents, I had read the original founding charter of Preston's grandfather's generation's skipping trust. I remembered the exact wording of the Golden Clause, a brilliantly paranoid legal failsafe designed to prevent inheritance wars. Preston was about to lose absolutely everything he had ever cared about. 3 years ago, Preston hired me to appraise a vast collection of antique maritime maps belonging to his late grandfather, a ruthless industrialist who built the family fortune from the ground up. While meticulously logging the inventory in the old estate library, I stumbled upon a heavy leather-bound binder hidden behind a row of encyclopedias. It contained the original unedited drafts of the Generations Skipping Trust. My appraiser instincts took over, and I read every single page. The old man despised weakness, but he despised bitter family infighting over unearned wealth even more. He had watched his own uncles tear a massive profitable shipping empire to shreds, fighting over resources, and he swore no heir of his would ever do the same. Article 7, subsection 4 was highlighted in faded yellow ink. The phrasing was ironclad, designed specifically to bypass any greedy son who might pit multiple children against each other for financial leverage. It stated unequivocally that in the event an heir apparent produced multiple children from a single pregnancy, meaning twins or triplets, sole financial guardianship of the entire trust automatically stripped away from the father. Complete administrative control would instantly transfer to the biological mother of the multiples. She would be granted absolute authority to manage the funds independently until the children reached the age of 21. The grandfather believed a mother of multiples would naturally divide assets equally to protect her young, whereas a father obsessed with legacy might play favorites or leverage the wealth for his own ego. Standing in the pristine examination room with the glossy ultrasound photos trembling slightly in my hand, the sheer brilliance of the grandfather's paranoia washed over me. This was exactly why Preston was panicking. This was why Gloria was throwing heavy canvas bags of cash at me, to terminate the pregnancy immediately. They already knew. They must have caught wind of the abnormally high hormone levels from my initial blood test at the family doctor earlier that week, a classic early clinical indicator of a multiple pregnancy. Preston knew that if I carried these babies to term, he would be legally locked out of the exact accounts he was currently raiding to cover his massive embezzlement tracks. The family trust was his shield. Without it, his entire Ponzi scheme would be exposed to the federal government in a matter of days. He was not just trying to force an abortion out of spite. He was fighting to stay out of federal prison. I thanked the kind doctor paid my medical bill entirely in cash to ensure no paper trail existed and walked out into the brisk Seattle afternoon. The heavy canvas duffel bag slung over my shoulder felt significantly lighter, now transformed from an insulting dirty bribe into the ultimate strategic weapon of destruction. Preston thought he was buying his freedom and silencing a penniless orphan. Instead, he had just handed me the exact war chest I needed to fund his absolute execution. I did not hail a rideshare to go back to my sprawling prison of a house. I had one more critical stop to make, and it required someone who spoke the ruthless language of financial ruin fluently. I directed my hired driver to the bustling financial district, stepping out in front of a towering glass high-rise that housed the most feared litigation firms in the entire Pacific Northwest. I took the express elevator to the 42nd floor, ignoring the intimidating stares of the suited paralegals as I walked directly to the reception desk of Vanguard and Associates. I was not there for a standard divorce attorney who would squabble over alimony payments or negotiate splitting the value of a house. I was there for an apex predator. I needed a lawyer who specialized in tearing apart corrupt wealth managers, someone who knew exactly how to freeze assets before the ink on a subpoena even dried. I asked specifically for the senior managing partner, a man notorious for his previous career as a relentless, unforgiving prosecutor for the Securities and Exchange Commission. The young receptionist looked at my simple, unbranded dress and the canvas bag slung over my shoulder. Her perfectly practiced professional smile bordering on outright condescension. She informed me in a perfectly polite yet dismissive tone that the senior partner required an initial retainer that most people could not afford on such short notice, subtly suggesting I seek counsel elsewhere. I did not argue with her. I simply unzipped the heavy duffel bag and pulled out thick sequential stacks of Gloria's $100 bills still wrapped in their original banking bands. I stacked them neatly on the polished glass reception desk one by one until the pile reached exactly $100,000. The receptionist's eyes widened drastically, her condescension vanishing instantly as she reached for her phone to make an urgent call. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from a sharp-eyed man in a bespoke charcoal suit. His office overlooked the entire Seattle skyline, fitting for a man who dismantled empires for a living. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the encrypted flash drive containing Preston's master ledgers. I slid it across the polished mahogany desk, placing it right next to my ultrasound photos and the remaining stacks of cash. I told him my husband was running a massive illegal Ponzi scheme, and I was about to legally seize control of his entire family trust, effectively stripping him of his power. I explained that I wanted to build an inescapable federal case, and I wanted to watch him burn to the ground, leaving nothing but ashes behind. The attorney looked at the cash, the drive, the medical photos, and then back at me. A dangerous, calculating smile spread slowly across his face as he leaned forward, recognizing a perfectly orchestrated trap unfolding before him. "Sit down right now, Bethany," he said softly, interlacing his fingers resting on the desk. "Let us talk strategy today." The strategy session with the former prosecutor laid the groundwork for an absolute legal slaughter. I left his high-rise office with a blueprint for Preston's destruction, but I needed to maintain my cover for just a little longer. 2 days later, the crisp Seattle wind whipped across the upper deck of a sprawling 100-foot super yacht. Kelsey had spared no expense for her maiden voyage party. Champagne flowed from ice sculptures and a live jazz band played softly against the backdrop of the Puget Sound. I stood near the railing, clutching a glass of sparkling cider, playing the role of the thoroughly broken wife. I wore a high-necked, long-sleeved silk gown deliberately chosen to project modesty and hide any lingering marks of Preston's aggression. Preston was in his element, holding court by the starboard bar. He laughed loudly, slapping the backs of local politicians and tech executives, the very same men whose retirement accounts he was actively draining to fund this floating monstrosity. I watched him sip his expensive bourbon, acting like the king of the world, completely unaware that the sword was already swinging down toward his neck. Kelsey paraded around the deck in a shimmering gold dress, demanding compliments from her wealthy guests. She cornered me near the appetizers, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "Enjoying the view?" Bethany Kelsey asked, gesturing grandly to the yacht. "It is a long way up from the group homes, isn't it? Try not to spill anything on the teak wood. It is imported from Brazil and costs more than your entire life insurance policy." I kept my eyes lowered, offering a submissive nod. "It is a beautiful vessel, Kelsey. You must be very proud." She scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Preston knows how to manage our legacy. That is what real bloodlines do. We elevate each other. I suggest you remember how lucky you are that my brother even lets you breathe the same air as us." She sauntered away to greet a local socialite, leaving me alone with my cider. I did not feel humiliated. I felt a cold, calculating thrill. Every insult, every display of stolen wealth was just another nail in their collective coffin. While the party raged above, a very different scene was unfolding below deck. Jamal Kelsey's husband was noticeably absent from the celebrations. As a brilliant corporate attorney, Jamal despised these ostentatious displays, but today his absence was rooted in something much darker. I wandered toward the staircase leading to the lower staterooms, pretending to look for a restroom, when I heard the unmistakable sound of raised voices echoing from the master cabin. I paused, pressing my back against the polished mahogany corridor wall, listening intently. "You think I am stupid?" Preston Jamal's voice demanded, vibrating with a suppressed, dangerous anger. "I am the legal counsel for this family. I reviewed the purchase agreements for this boat this morning. The funds were not drawn from the grandfather's trust. They were wired from a holding company in the Cayman Islands. A holding company tied directly to 3 of your largest American clients." Preston let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. "You are looking too closely at things that do not concern you, Jamal. The money was moved legally. It is an internal loan structure." "Do not lie to me," Jamal shot back, his tone turning lethal. "An internal loan structure does not use shell companies to bypass federal reporting. You are embezzling client funds, Preston. You bought a $4 million toy for my wife using stolen money. You have implicated my family in a federal crime." I heard the heavy thud of a glass hitting a wooden table. Preston's voice dropped, shedding all its charismatic warmth, revealing the arrogant, venomous predator underneath. "Let us get something incredibly straight right now, Jamal." Preston sneered. "You married into this family. You enjoy the perks, the country club memberships, the corner office at your firm because my mother made a few phone calls. Do not come down here and play the righteous crusader with me. You look the other way, you sign the compliance forms, and you keep your mouth shut. I will not risk my law license or my freedom for your criminal Ponzi scheme," Jamal stated, his voice absolute and unwavering. "I am done. I am withdrawing my name from all family accounts." Preston stepped closer. I could hear the aggressive shift of his shoes against the floorboards. "You will do exactly what I tell you to do. Remember your place in this family, Jamal. You step out of line, and I will personally see to it that you are disbarred and ruined. You will not be able to find work as a public defender in traffic court by the time I am finished with you." The silence that followed was suffocating. The sheer classist audacity of Preston's threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. Jamal was a self-made man, a fiercely intelligent attorney who had earned everything through his own brilliance. Preston was nothing but a parasite feeding on his clients and his ancestors. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Preston," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. The stateroom door ripped open. I quickly stepped back into the shadows of the hallway alcove. Jamal stormed out of the room, his face a mask of absolute fury. He did not go back upstairs to join the party. He walked straight to the lower deck exit, signaled the crew to lower the private tender boat, and left his own wife's celebration without looking back. Preston emerged a moment later, straightening his tie and smoothing his suit jacket. He took a deep breath, plastered that fake $1 million smile back onto his face, and headed upstairs to rejoin the billionaires he was actively robbing. I waited in the shadows, my heart pounding a steady, victorious rhythm. The alliance between the family members had just shattered. The structural integrity of Preston's empire was failing rapidly, and I was holding the sledgehammer. I walked back up to the main deck, blending seamlessly into the crowd. 10 minutes later, my purse vibrated slightly against my hip. I casually slipped into the luxury bathroom, locked the door, and pulled out my secret burner phone. The screen lit up with a single encrypted text message from an unknown number. But I knew exactly who sent it. The message read, "Preston is going down. I am contacting the federal authorities tomorrow morning. Do not let him corner you. Get out of that house tonight." I stared at the glowing screen. Jamal had flipped. He was an honorable man who refused to drown with a sinking ship, and his legal expertise was exactly what I needed to accelerate the timeline. Preston thought he had everyone under his thumb. He thought his threats ensured silence. Instead, his arrogance had just activated the detonator. I flushed the toilet to maintain my cover, washed my hands in the gold-plated sink, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My bruised cheek was thoroughly concealed, but my eyes burned with a fierce, unstoppable fire. I typed a rapid response to Jamal's encrypted number. Message received. I am already packed. Let us burn him to the ground. I slipped the phone back into my dress pocket and walked out of the bathroom. The party was reaching its peak, the music swelling over the dark waters of the Sound. I looked at Preston, who was currently clinking champagne glasses with a tech executive. I smiled my most convincing, submissive smile. Enjoy the champagne, my dear husband, I thought to myself. Drink up, because tomorrow you are going to lose everything. I made my excuse to Kelsey, citing severe morning sickness, and took a private car back to the estate. The sprawling house was pitch black and suffocatingly quiet. I did not bother turning on the lights. I moved through the dark halls by memory, heading straight for the master suite. I had already stashed a small unbranded go bag in the very back of my walk-in closet, hidden beneath a row of winter coats. Inside were my passport, the encrypted flash drive containing Preston's master ledgers, and the remaining cash from Gloria's bribe. I pulled the bag out, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I just needed to grab the burner phone from the hollowed-out encyclopedia down in the library, and I would be out the door. Jamal was waiting for my signal. The heavy oak door of the bedroom slammed shut with the force of a gunshot. I spun around, dropping the duffel bag. Preston stood in the doorway. He had not stayed at the yacht party to mingle. He had followed me home. The charming, boisterous wealth manager from the upper deck was completely gone. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a cold, terrifying clarity. He took a slow step into the room. In his right hand, he held a crumpled piece of paper. I know exactly what you did today, Preston said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. He held up the paper. It was the carbon copy receipt from the financial litigation attorney. I had paid entirely in cash, but the law firm's receptionist had insisted on printing a standard intake receipt. I had torn it up and flushed it down a public restroom toilet, but I must have missed a fragment. A fragment with the firm's highly recognizable logo. You hired a former federal prosecutor, Preston sneered, closing the distance between us. You took my mother's money, and you walked right into the financial district to build a case against me. I backed away, bumping into the vanity mirror. Preston, you need to step back, I said, maintaining absolute eye contact. I refused to show him fear. Fear was the currency he thrived on. Preston lunged. He did not slap me this time. He knew a bruised face would ruin the optics of his upcoming performance. Instead, his large hands shot out, wrapping like steel vices around my upper arms. He lifted me slightly off the floor and slammed me hard against the wooden closet door. The impact knocked the wind out of my lungs. I gasped, struggling to break his grip, but his fingers dug ruthlessly into my biceps, leaving deep, painful indentations. You really thought you could outsmart me? Preston hissed, his face inches from mine. You are an orphan who appraises dusty furniture. I manage billions of dollars. I control the political donations of half the state senate. Did you honestly believe I do not have a private investigator tracking your every movement the second you leave this gated community? I stared back at him, my breathing shallow but steady. I know the trust is empty, Preston. I know about the Cayman accounts. Jamal knows. It is already over. Preston laughed, a harsh, grating sound that vibrated in his chest. Jamal is a coward who will keep his mouth shut to protect his own lifestyle. And you are a hysterical pregnant woman suffering from severe delusions. He released my left arm just long enough to reach into his suit jacket. He pulled out a folded legal document and shoved it against my chest. Read it, Bethany. Read your future. I glanced down at the thick parchment. The header was printed in bold red ink. Involuntary psychiatric hold and medical conservatorship petition. It was already signed by a high-profile private psychiatrist in Seattle, a man known to cater to the ultra-wealthy. The document detailed a fabricated history of severe paranoid schizophrenia, listing erratic behavior, uncontrollable spending, and a sudden violent obsession with financial conspiracies. I paid him $200,000 this afternoon, Preston whispered, leaning in so close I could feel the heat of his breath. He signed off on a full clinical evaluation without ever meeting you. You are legally classified as a danger to yourself and others. You will never get away with this, I said, my voice dripping with venom. The hospital will evaluate me. They will see I am perfectly sane. By the time a hospital evaluates you, it will be too late. Preston countered, a wicked, triumphant smile spreading across his face. You are not going to a hospital tonight. You are going to the annual investment gala tomorrow evening. The entire board of directors will be there. The mayor will be there. Every major client I possess will be in the grand ballroom. And right in the middle of my keynote speech, you are going to have a massive, very public psychotic break. I stared at him, the sheer depravity of his plan locking my muscles in place. He was going to use my own accusations against me, framing my knowledge of his crimes as absolute insanity. I have hired 2 private security contractors. Preston continued, detailing the trap with chilling precision. They will be dressed as medical orderlies waiting by the service elevators. When you inevitably start screaming your delusions about offshore accounts and stolen money, they will rush in with a straitjacket. 500 of the most powerful people in this city will watch my tragic, insane wife get dragged out of the ballroom. I will be the grieving, dedicated husband who tried his best to save you. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Once you are committed to the private facility under my legal conservatorship, I have total medical power of attorney. The doctors will agree that the extreme stress of a twin pregnancy is exacerbating your schizophrenia. We will terminate the pregnancy for your own safety. The threat to my family trust is neutralized, and you spend the rest of your life heavily sedated in a padded room. Preston suddenly ripped my purse from my shoulder. He dumped the contents onto the floor, kicking aside my lipstick and keys until he found my regular smartphone. He scooped it up and shoved it into his pocket. He did not know about the burner phone hidden downstairs in the library. He thought he had severed my only lifeline. He stepped back, smoothing the lapels of his suit jacket. The monstrous transformation was seamless. He looked like the perfect polished wealth manager once again. He walked backward out of the master bedroom, pulling the heavy oak door with him. I stood frozen against the closet, my arms throbbing from his violent grip. I listened to the sharp mechanical click of the deadbolt locking from the outside. He was sealing me inside the master suite so I could not escape before his grand performance. Through the thick wood of the door, Preston's voice drifted back to me, laced with mocking arrogance. Dress nicely for tomorrow, sweetheart. It is your last night in polite society. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hallway until the house fell silent. I did not waste a single second on tears. Preston thought he had me caged in a fortress of reinforced wood and brass. He forgot that I spent my entire professional life disassembling and restoring 17th century furniture. I walked over to my appraisal kit tucked under my vanity. I pulled out a micro-precision torque screwdriver and a vial of synthetic solvent designed to loosen century-old oxidation. The bedroom door had 3 massive brass hinges facing inside. A design flaw dictated by Gloria's obsession with a seamless exterior hallway aesthetic. I applied 2 drops of the solvent to the top hinge. The chemical reaction was instant, eating through the decorative lacquer and lubricating the heavy pins. I slotted the screwdriver into the first groove and applied steady pressure. The screw groaned, then yielded. I worked with the methodical rhythm of a bomb technician. Top hinge, middle hinge, bottom hinge. My upper arms screamed in agony, the deep bruises Preston left pulsating with every rotation of my wrist, but I ignored the pain. Within 12 minutes, 9 heavy brass screws lay on the carpet. I grabbed my unbranded go bag from the closet. Inside sat the encrypted flash drive containing the bankrupt trust ledgers, the $100,000 in cash, and the glossy ultrasound photos of my twins. I shoved my appraisal tools back into their case, grabbed my burner phone, and walked back to the door. I wedged a metal pry bar under the bottom edge of the heavy oak panel and pushed down. The door lifted off its frame with a dull scrape. I tipped it backward, letting it lean against the bedroom wall, leaving a gaping hole leading to freedom. I slipped out into the darkened hallway. The security system was armed, but I knew the blind spots. I bypassed the motion sensors in the main foyer and headed for the service exit through the catering kitchen. I punched in the override code I had memorized from the cleaning staff and slipped out into the freezing Seattle night. I walked exactly 2 miles down the unlit shoulder of the gated community's access road before I dared to turn on the burner phone. I requested an anonymous rideshare and waited in the shadows of a manicured hedge. When the car arrived, I typed a single encrypted message to Jamal. Meet me at the all-night diner on 4th Avenue in 20 minutes. Come alone. I have the ledgers. The diner was a sterile box smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. It was deserted except for a tired waitress dozing behind the counter. I sat in a back booth facing the door, my coat pulled tight around my shoulders. Jamal walked in exactly 19 minutes later. He wore a heavy trench coat over a rumpled suit, looking exhausted but deeply alert. He slid into the vinyl booth across from me. He took one look at my face, and his jaw tightened. I had removed my heavy concealer in the bathroom. The dark, ugly purple contusion on my cheekbone was fully exposed. As I reached across the table to hand him the flash drive, my coat sleeve slipped up, revealing the vicious finger-shaped bruises wrapping around my bicep. Jamal stared at the marks. His hands curled into fists on the Formica table. "He did that to you tonight," Jamal asked, his voice thick with a quiet, lethal fury. "He did this when he locked me in the master suite?" I stated flatly. He also informed me he paid a private psychiatrist $200,000 this afternoon. Tomorrow night, right in the middle of the annual investment gala, Preston is going to announce that I have suffered a severe psychotic break. He has orderlies waiting to drag me out in a straitjacket. He plans to commit me force a medical abortion and seize total control of my assets to protect the trust. Jamal closed his eyes, taking a sharp, deep breath. The raw disgust radiating from him was palpable. "I knew Preston was a thief and a parasite," Jamal said, opening his eyes. "I did not want to believe he was a monster. I am done. I am completely done. I am taking this flash drive straight to my contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission right now. I have a federal judge on speed dial who will sign an emergency warrant before sunrise." I shook my head. "A warrant is not enough, Jamal." I reached into my bag and pulled out the ultrasound photos, sliding them across the table next to the flash drive. "He is trying to force an abortion because I am having twins. By his grandfather's own trust rules, the second those babies are born, Preston loses sole financial control. I become the legal guardian of the entire estate." Jamal stared at the ultrasound, his sharp attorney mind processing the legal implications of the trust loophole. "Preston is cornered," Jamal murmured, awe and horror mixing in his tone. "He is facing federal prison and total financial ruin." "Exactly," I said. "But if you just arrest him tomorrow morning, Gloria will mobilize their crisis management team. She will bury the evidence, hire a scapegoat accountant to take the fall, and tie me up in litigation for the next decade. She will claim Preston acted alone and shield the remaining assets. We cannot just cut off the head of the snake. We have to burn the entire nest." Jamal leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You want to execute a public exposure." "I want a public execution," I corrected. "I want the investors to know. I want the media to know. I want Gloria and Kelsey implicated in front of the exact high society they claim to rule." Jamal tapped his fingers against the table, calculating the risk. "If we do this your way, you are walking into a trap tomorrow night. The psychiatrist's order gives Preston the legal authority to detain you on site. If we fail, they will lock you in a padded room, and I will be disbarred for interfering with a medical conservatorship." "We will not fail," I said, leaning in. "You get the federal agents ready, you secure the asset freeze warrants based on these ledgers, and you make sure you are standing in that ballroom when I take the stage." Jamal looked at the bruises on my arm, then at the flash drive containing the ruin of his wife's family. He let out a harsh, resolute breath. "If we just arrest him, Gloria will bury the evidence and blame it all on a rogue accountant. We need them to publicly confess to the money trail." I smiled coldly, feeling the absolute power of our synchronized trap snapping into place. Then we let Preston throw his gala. I left the diner as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed across the Seattle skyline. I hailed another anonymous rideshare, but I did not head to a hotel to sleep. Sleep was a luxury for people who were not actively dismantling a financial empire. I directed the driver straight back to the financial district, watching the city wake up through the tinted glass. I had a 9 o'clock appointment with my newly retained attorney, Richard Thorne, the former prosecutor who was currently sharpening his knives for Preston. When I walked into his corner office, Thorne was already at his desk, 2 cups of black coffee steaming over a mountain of printed spreadsheets. I had sent him the decrypted ledgers from my secure server hours ago. He looked up, his eyes sharp and completely devoid of fatigue. He pointed to the papers covering his mahogany desk. "Your husband is not just a thief," Bethany Thorne said, handing me a cup of coffee. "He is a catastrophically reckless gambler. The client funds he embezzled were not just dumped into offshore accounts to sit and gather interest. He used them to leverage highly volatile private equity loans. He was trying to out-earn his own theft to quietly replace the stolen capital before anyone noticed. But the market tanked and he doubled down." I took a sip of the bitter coffee, feeling the caffeine hit my exhausted system. "How bad are the private debts?" Thorne pulled a specific red folder from the stack. "Bad enough that he put up the entire family estate as collateral to a syndicate of private lenders based out of Chicago. He took out an $8 million short-term bridge loan 3 months ago. He has missed 2 consecutive payments. These lenders are not traditional banks. They do not send polite collection letters. They seize assets rapidly and ruthlessly. Preston is legally drowning, and if he defaults on the final payment due at the end of this month, they will take the waterfront mansion right out from under Gloria's feet." I stared at the red folder, the gears in my appraiser mind locking into place. In the world of high-end antiquities, when an estate goes bankrupt, the creditors auction off the debts to the highest bidder. If you own the debt, you own the asset. I set my coffee cup down. "Can my independent holding company buy those promissory notes today?" Thorne leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, predatory smile forming. "I was hoping you would ask that. Yes, private debt is entirely transferable, but these lenders will want a premium to walk away from a guaranteed real estate seizure. You would need to front at least $10 million in liquid cash by noon today to execute the hostile takeover of his debt." I pulled my encrypted burner phone from my coat pocket. "Last night, I authorized the sale of a verified 17th century Ming Dynasty vase to a private collector in New York. The funds were sitting in my Cayman account, completely detached from Preston's radioactive financial web. Draft the purchase agreements," I told Thorne, unlocking my secure banking application. "I am liquidating my entire overseas art reserve. Wire the funds to the Chicago syndicate through my corporate LLC. I do not want Preston to owe dangerous loan sharks anymore. I want him to owe me." For the next 4 hours, Thorne's office transformed into a war room. We executed the financial maneuvers with absolute precision. I watched the $10 million wire transfer leave my account, a terrifying sum of money representing 5 years of my grueling hidden labor. But as Thorne received the digital countersignatures from the Chicago lenders, a profound sense of invincibility washed over me. I was no longer just the pregnant, abused wife running from a wealthy tyrant. I was officially Preston's largest unlisted creditor. I held the deed to the sprawling waterfront estate where Gloria had mocked me. I owned the roof over their heads. Just before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the heavy oak doors of the office swung open. Jamal walked in, looking exactly like a man who had just signed a pact to destroy his own in-laws. He dropped his leather briefcase onto the sofa and unbuttoned his suit jacket, letting out a long, heavy exhale. "The SEC is locked and loaded," Jamal announced, pouring himself a glass of water from the side table. "I met with the regional director. They have reviewed the ledgers you pulled from Preston's safe. It is a slam dunk. They are sending 12 undercover agents to the gala tonight. They will be posing as catering staff and high-net-worth guests. But we have a severe problem." I looked up from the newly signed promissory notes. "What kind of problem?" "Preston is completely unhinged," Jamal said, gripping his water glass. "I just came from the firm. He is screaming at his assistants, throwing files and firing junior analysts for breathing too loudly. Kelsey called me an hour ago crying because Preston snapped at her for asking about her yacht maintenance fees. But that is not the worst part." Jamal pulled his phone from his pocket and set it on the desk. "Preston thinks you are hiding in a cheap motel. He does not realize you have resources. He told Gloria that you stole some cash from her, but that you are too stupid to know how to hide. He is still moving forward with the psychiatric hold." He told the board of directors that tonight's keynote speech will include a tragic personal announcement regarding his wife's mental health. He actually believes he can still pull this off. He is relying on the element of surprise, Thorne interjected, adjusting his cuffs. He expects you to show up to the gala looking terrified and disheveled, acting exactly like the paranoid schizophrenic he paid that corrupt doctor to diagnose you as. If you look like a victim, the crowd will believe his narrative. I will not look like a victim. I stated, my voice echoing with icy resolve. Jamal, does he have the orderlies waiting? Yes, Jamal confirmed. 2 private security contractors dressed as paramedics. They are stationed by the kitchen service elevators. Preston instructed them to move in the second he gives a specific hand signal from the podium. He is going to try to humiliate you in front of 500 people, drug you, and lock you away. I stood up, gathering my documents and sliding them into my bag. Let him try. I need to go prepare. Jamal, make sure Kelsey and Gloria are seated in the front row. I want them to have a perfect view when the ceiling collapses. I left the financial district and checked into a luxury suite at a discreet hotel under my corporate alias. I had 4 hours until the annual investment gala began. I ordered room service, forcing myself to eat for the sake of the twins growing inside me. The morning sickness had subsided, replaced by a massive surge of adrenaline. I took a long, scalding shower, washing away the smell of the diner and the lingering ghost of Preston's violent grip on my arms. When I stepped out of the bathroom, a courier had delivered the garment bag I ordered over the phone. I unzipped the canvas to reveal a custom-tailored floor-length emerald gown. It was structurally flawless, featuring long silk sleeves that perfectly concealed the dark, ugly bruises marring my biceps. It was not a dress meant for a subdued, obedient wife. It was armor designed for a queen walking onto a battlefield. I sat at the vanity mirror, meticulously applying my makeup. I did not use heavy concealer to hide the bruise on my cheekbone this time. Instead, I used a color-correcting primer to perfectly blend it into a sharp contour. I looked powerful. I looked untouchable. I looked like a woman who legally owned a $3 million estate and held the leash to a federal indictment. As I fastened a pair of diamond drop earrings I had purchased years ago with my first major appraisal commission, my burner phone vibrated violently against the marble countertop. I glanced down at the glowing screen. It was an unknown number, but the venom in the text message was unmistakable. It was Gloria. Preston is furious. You left the house. The message read, radiating aristocratic rage through the digital text. You took my money, you ungrateful thief. If you do not show up to the gala tonight and sign the medical surrender forms exactly as Preston instructed, we will destroy you. We will release the infidelity statements to the press. We will ensure you are hunted down, locked in a ward, and stripped of everything. Do not make this harder on yourself. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the glass screen. I pictured Gloria standing in her fake art gallery sipping stolen champagne, entirely oblivious to the fact that I now held the deed to the very ground she stood on. I pictured Preston sweating in his tailored tuxedo, rehearsing his fake tears for the crowd. I tapped the screen, typing out my response with slow, deliberate precision. I did not justify my actions. I did not beg. I simply gave them exactly what they wanted. I will be there. I hit send, dropped the phone into my clutch, and walked out the door. The trap was set, the executioners were in position, and it was time to let the monster dig his own grave. The annual investment gala was the undisputed crown jewel of the Seattle financial calendar. As my hired Maybach pulled up to the grand entrance of the historic Symphony Hall, the sheer staggering scale of Preston's facade was on full display. Spotlights swept across the towering stone architecture, slicing through the crisp evening air. Valets in pristine white jackets rushed to open the doors of imported luxury vehicles. Paparazzi and society photographers crowded against the velvet ropes, their camera flashes creating a blinding, continuous strobe light as the city's most influential figures stepped out onto the red carpet. State senators, tech billionaires, and real estate moguls, the very people whose retirement accounts Preston was actively draining, milled about the entrance, exchanging hollow pleasantries and clinking champagne flutes. I sat in the back of the Maybach for a brief second, smoothing the rich silk of my emerald gown over my lap. Preston expected a frantic, unkempt woman to stumble out of a cheap taxi. He expected a broken, hysterical victim he could easily point to and label as legally insane. He needed me to look like a woman losing her grip on reality to justify the involuntary psychiatric hold he had illegally purchased. The chauffeur opened my door. I stepped out, planting my silver heels firmly onto the red carpet. The deep emerald fabric of my gown caught the flashing lights of the cameras instantly. It draped perfectly over my frame, the long, tailored silk sleeves entirely concealing the brutal finger-shaped bruises Preston had left on my upper arms just 24 hours ago. My posture was flawless. My expression was serene, radiating the absolute terrifying calm of a woman holding the executioner's axe. The society photographers immediately recognized me as the wife of the evening's keynote speaker. They called my name, begging for photos. I smiled, turning slightly to give them the perfect angle, projecting nothing but effortless grace and untouchable wealth. From the top of the grand staircase, I finally saw him. Preston stood near the entrance to the main ballroom, holding court with a group of wealthy venture capitalists. He wore a custom velvet tuxedo, a fresh haircut, and his signature blinding smile. He looked like the undisputed king of the financial world. Beside him stood Gloria, dripping in stolen diamonds, sipping from a crystal flute and nodding along to whatever lies her son was spinning to his investors. Preston turned his head, his eyes locked onto me at the bottom of the stairs. I watched his million-dollar smile fracture in real time. The glass of expensive scotch in his hand tilted dangerously, nearly spilling onto the immaculate cuff of his tuxedo. He blinked hard, visibly jolted by the sight of me. I did not look like a woman suffering a psychotic break. I did not look like a penniless orphan running on empty. I looked like a queen arriving to inspect her newly conquered territory. He recovered quickly, because narcissists always do when there is an audience watching. He handed his glass to a passing waiter and excused himself from the group of investors. He walked down the carpeted stairs toward me, his arms wide open in a highly theatrical display of spousal devotion. The cameras flashed faster, capturing the beautiful, wealthy couple reuniting on the red carpet. Preston pulled me into a tight, suffocating embrace. To the photographers snapping away, it looked like a passionate hug. To me, it felt like a snake coiling tightly around its prey. "What are you wearing?" Preston hissed directly into my ear, his breath hot against my neck, his tone laced with absolute venom. "How did you pay for this? You are supposed to be hysterical. You are ruining the narrative." I patted his back, leaning away just enough to maintain the loving illusion for the cameras. "I bought it with my own money, Preston," I whispered back, maintaining a flawless, radiant smile. "I told you I would be here. I am just dressing for the occasion." Preston gripped my waist, his fingers digging into my ribs with the same punishing, violent pressure he had used last night. "It does not matter what you are wearing," he growled under his breath, turning us slightly so the photographers could get a profile shot. "The private orderlies are waiting by the kitchen doors. The moment I give the signal during my speech, they will drag you out of here. Your fancy dress will just make it look like a tragic, manic episode. Keep smiling, sweetheart. It is your last night in public." He released me, kissing my cheek with manufactured tenderness. He gestured for me to walk ahead of him into the grand foyer. I glided past him, my head held high, completely ignoring the dull ache in my ribs. Gloria was waiting for us near the coat check. Her cold eyes raked over my emerald silk gown, calculating its exact retail value in seconds. Her aristocratic features tightened with sheer indignation. She despised the fact that I looked better than her, that an orphan she viewed as absolute trash could command the attention of the entire room. "Did you steal that from a client's estate?" Gloria muttered as I approached, her voice perfectly pitched to reach only my ears. "You are a thief, Bethany. Enjoy playing dress-up. Preston is going to have you committed before the main course is even served. You will be trading that imported silk for a hospital gown by midnight." I met her furious gaze without blinking. I am not the one who needs to worry about trading my wardrobe for an institutional uniform, Gloria. Make sure you enjoy the caviar tonight. Gloria opened her mouth to snap back, but a sudden commotion near the open bar drew our attention. Kelsey, my sister-in-law, was marching toward us. She looked utterly chaotic, wearing a sequined silver dress that was far too flashy for the elegant setting. She held a large crystal goblet filled to the absolute brim with dark red wine. Her eyes were fixed squarely on the front of my emerald gown. She had clearly received the memo from Preston and Gloria. I was supposed to look crazy. I was supposed to look like a mess. Since I had failed to provide them with the aesthetic of a mental breakdown, Kelsey had decided to create it herself. She picked up her pace, weaving through the wealthy guests with clumsy, aggressive determination. Her intention was glaringly obvious. She was going to collide with me, dump the dark red wine all over my silk dress, and force a massive public altercation. If I reacted with anger, Preston would use it as proof of my erratic, aggressive behavior. If I cried, he would use it as proof of my emotional instability. It was a cheap, transparent trap. I braced myself, calculating the fastest way to step aside without causing a scene. Kelsey lunged forward, her arms swinging the heavy crystal goblet directly toward my chest. Before the red liquid could even breach the rim of the glass, a large, strong hand shot out from the crowd, long fingers wrapped firmly around Kelsey's wrist, stopping her arm dead in its tracks. The sudden, violent halt caused the wine to slosh backward, spilling directly over Kelsey's own hand and splashing heavily down the front of her shimmering silver dress. Kelsey let out a sharp, indignant shriek, dropping the glass onto the carpeted floor. She spun around to face the person who had intercepted her attack. Jamal stood there looking immaculate in a sharp black suit. As a highly respected corporate attorney and an African-American man navigating these elite, predominantly white financial circles, Jamal had always carried himself with a quiet, unshakable dignity. He never raised his voice, and he never lost his temper. But tonight, there was a cold, absolute authority radiating from him that made even Preston take a hesitant step back. Jamal did not let go of his wife's wrist. He looked down at the dark red wine dripping from her ruined silver sequins, his expression completely devoid of any husbandly sympathy. "You are embarrassing yourself, Kelsey," Jamal said, his voice carrying the heavy weight of a judge delivering a final sentence. "Go to the restroom and clean yourself up." Kelsey wrenched her arm free, her face flushing a deep, humiliated crimson. "You ruined my dress. Jamal, what is wrong with you? She is the one who is crazy." Jamal pulled a crisp, white handkerchief from his breast pocket and handed it to her. "Enjoy the yacht while you can, Kelsey." Kelsey stood frozen, holding the white linen handkerchief. The dark red wine dripped from her ruined silver sequins onto the pristine carpet. She opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Jamal did not wait for a response. He turned his back on his wife and walked seamlessly into the sea of wealthy investors, disappearing into the crowd with the absolute composure of a man who had just severed his ties to a sinking ship. Preston watched the entire exchange from the edge of the ballroom. I saw the muscle in his jaw feather. He realized his sister had failed to create the public spectacle he needed. He realized his brother-in-law was openly defying him in front of Seattle elite. The perfect narrative was slipping through his fingers, and panic is a dangerous catalyst for a narcissist. He abandoned his group of venture capitalists and marched directly toward me. His signature smile was plastered firmly on his face for the benefit of the surrounding photographers, but his eyes were entirely dead. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm, his fingers wrapped around the exact spot where he had left deep, agonizing bruises the night before. Pain flared white-hot through my shoulder, but the thick emerald silk of my custom gown hid the damage perfectly. I did not flinch. I did not give him the satisfaction of a grimace. I kept my posture impossibly straight and smiled back at him for the cameras. "Time for a private word, sweetheart," Preston whispered through gritted teeth. He forced me forward, his grip functioning like an iron vice disguised as a loving embrace. We walked past the towering ice sculptures and the trays of imported caviar. He nodded politely to a state senator and waved at a real estate developer, all while pushing me toward the back corridors of the Symphony Hall. The contrast between his public charm and his private brutality was sickening, but it was a duality I had studied for 5 years. I knew his rhythms, I knew his weaknesses. We approached a set of heavy, soundproof mahogany doors, guarded by a private security detail. Preston gave the men a sharp nod. They opened the doors and stepped aside. Preston shoved me inside and the heavy doors slammed shut behind us, instantly cutting off the soaring notes of the string quartet playing in the grand foyer. The VIP antechamber was suffocatingly opulent. Dark velvet wallpaper absorbed the light from a single crystal chandelier. The room was designed for elite politicians to make quiet illegal deals away from the prying eyes of the press. It was utterly isolated. Sitting on a tufted leather sofa in the center of the room was Gloria. My mother-in-law had a fresh glass of vintage champagne in her hand. She looked up as Preston shoved me toward the center of the room. Her aristocratic face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. She set her crystal flute down on a mirrored side table with a sharp clink. "I told you she would try to play dress-up," Gloria said, her eyes raking over my emerald gown with absolute disgust. "You look absurd, Bethany. You can wrap a stray dog in expensive silk, but it still belongs in the pound. Did you honestly think parading around the red carpet was going to save you tonight?" I smoothed the front of my dress, my movements deliberately slow and unbothered. "I think the press appreciated the aesthetic, Gloria. The photographers certainly seemed to think I belonged here." Gloria stood up, her face flushing a mottled red. "You belong exactly where we found you. A penniless orphan scrounging for scraps. We gave you a name. We gave you access to a world you could never have entered on your own, and you repay us by trying to hold my son hostage with a pregnancy. You are nothing but a common gold digger trying to steal from a legacy family." Preston walked over to a heavy oak desk in the corner of the room. He picked up a thick stack of legal documents and a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. He turned around and slammed the papers onto the glass coffee table sitting between me and the sofa. "The game is over, Bethany," Preston said, his voice stripped of all its former warmth. The fake smile was entirely gone. He looked cornered and feral. "We are done playing nice." I looked down at the documents. The bold red ink at the top of the page was impossible to miss. Involuntary psychiatric hold and medical conservatorship petition. It was the exact same document he had shoved against my chest last night, but now it possessed a series of fresh, official-looking stamps from the county clerk. "I paid the private psychiatrist his $200,000, Preston stated, pacing around the glass table like a caged predator. "He signed the final clinical evaluation an hour ago. You are officially documented as suffering from severe violent paranoid schizophrenia. The papers state that your pregnancy has triggered a catastrophic psychotic break, making you a severe danger to yourself and the financial assets of my family." Gloria stepped closer to the table, her eyes gleaming with wicked anticipation. "We really did try to help you, Bethany. We brought you into our home, but the mental illness you inherited from whatever gutter trash parents abandoned you was just too much to overcome. The society papers will run the story tomorrow. It will be a tragic tale of a dedicated wealth manager doing everything he could to save his deeply disturbed wife." Preston stopped pacing and pointed the heavy gold fountain pen directly at my face. "This is your final warning. You are going to pick up this pen and sign the medical surrender forms on the bottom line. You are going to legally grant me total medical and financial power of attorney. You are going to authorize the termination of the pregnancy for your own psychiatric safety." I kept my hands clasped loosely in front of my waist. "And if I decline?" Preston stepped directly into my personal space. The smell of expensive scotch and nervous sweat radiated off him. "If you decline," I raise my hand. "The 2 private medical orderlies I hired are standing right outside the service entrance behind that wall. They have an industrial straitjacket and heavy chemical sedatives. If you do not sign this paper right now, I will signal them to come in. They will drag you out into the main ballroom in front of 500 of my wealthiest clients. You will be screaming and thrashing. I will announce to the crowd that my wife has lost her mind and needs immediate institutionalization." Gloria smiled, picking up her champagne flute again. You will be strapped to a gurney and locked in a padded room at a private facility I personally selected. Preston will still get the conservatorship, but you will have to suffer the absolute humiliation of a public breakdown. No one will ever believe a word you say again. You will be medicated until you cannot even remember your own name. Sign the paper, Bethany. Save yourself the embarrassment of being dragged out like an animal. I looked at Preston. His chest was heaving. He needed this signature. He needed me neutralized before his keynote speech, so he could confidently assure his investors that his personal life was under control. He needed to eliminate the twin pregnancy to secure his grip on the bankrupt family trust. He thought he held every single advantage in the room. He had absolutely no idea that I had spent the entire morning liquidating my overseas art reserves to purchase his $8 million private debt. He did not know that his brother-in-law was currently standing in the grand foyer alongside 12 undercover federal agents waiting for the trap to spring. I looked down at the thick parchment on the glass table. The blank signature line mocked me, demanding submission. I reached out and took the gold-plated fountain pen from Preston's hand. His shoulders instantly dropped. A heavy, triumphant sigh escaped his lips. He thought he had won. He thought the threat of public humiliation and a straitjacket had broken my spirit. Gloria let out a sharp, victorious laugh and took a long sip of her champagne. "Smart girl," Preston murmured, adjusting his velvet lapels with returning arrogance. "I knew you would finally understand your place. Sign the bottom line and press hard. There are 3 carbon copies underneath." I leaned over the glass coffee table. I uncapped the heavy fountain pen. The gold nib hovered just inches above the pristine white paper. I did not let my hand shake. I did not show an ounce of fear. I pressed the pen against the signature line, but I did not write my name. I did not sign away my medical rights. I did not authorize a conservatorship. I did not surrender the lives of the twins growing inside me. Instead, I wrote a single devastating sentence across the legal document. My handwriting was sharp, elegant, and perfectly legible. I capped the pen and tossed it onto the glass table. The heavy metal clattered against the surface. I stood up straight and smoothed the front of my emerald gown. Preston frowned, confused by my sudden movement. He leaned over the table to inspect the document, expecting to see my signature securing his freedom. He stared at the ink. I had written, "Check your Cayman accounts." Preston froze. His entire body went rigid. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He stared at the 4 words written on the psychiatric hold petition, his brain struggling to comprehend how the penniless orphan he married could possibly know about his illegal offshore shell companies. Before he could even open his mouth to demand an explanation, the silence in the VIP antechamber was shattered. A sharp, demanding buzz echoed from inside his tuxedo jacket. Preston slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out his encrypted smartphone. The screen was glaringly bright in the dim room. A high-priority notification banner dominated the display. I watched his eyes track the text on the screen. I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. The trap had officially snapped shut. Preston tapped the notification banner with a thumb that suddenly shook with violent tremors. The secure login screen of his Cayman Islands wealth management portal materialized. Face ID verified his identity. The dashboard loaded, but the familiar, comforting rows of 8-figure balances were entirely gone. In their place, a solid red banner stretched across the top of the digital display. The text was stark, clinical, and absolutely devastating. "Account frozen. Mandatory federal injunction applied. Securities and Exchange Commission hold in effect." He tapped the screen frantically, his polished fingernail hitting the refresh icon over and over again. The red banner remained. He navigated to his secondary shell company accounts. Frozen. He clicked on the holding firm that funded his mother's lifestyle. Frozen. Every single digital vault containing the stolen millions he had siphoned from his elite American clients was locked down tight. The money was utterly inaccessible. Gloria let out an impatient sigh, swirling the vintage champagne in her crystal flute. "What is taking so long, Preston?" she demanded, irritated by the delay. "Force her to sign the paper so we can signal the orderlies." The mayor is waiting for us at table 1. Preston did not hear her. The polished, charismatic armor he wore for the Seattle high society completely disintegrated, leaving behind nothing but a cornered, rabid animal. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He dropped his encrypted smartphone onto the glass coffee table. It shattered the silence with a sharp crack. He lunged across the small space between us. He did not bother with grabbing my arms this time. His large hands shot directly for my throat. His fingers clamped down around my windpipe with terrifying force, slamming my spine hard against the edge of the heavy mahogany desk. The impact sent a shockwave of pain through my lower back, but the sudden lack of oxygen was the immediate threat. "What did you do?" Preston roared, his spit flying across my face. His thumbs dug viciously into my vocal cords. "What did you do to my accounts, you lying thief?" Gloria shrieked, dropping her champagne flute. The crystal shattered across the dark carpet, the expensive wine soaking into the fibers. "Preston, stop!" she yelled, panic finally piercing her aristocratic facade. "You will leave marks. The orderlies cannot take her if she looks like she was assaulted." Preston ignored his mother entirely. His eyes were wide, manic, and completely devoid of reason. He was squeezing harder, desperate to choke the answers out of me. Unlocking the Cayman accounts required a massive, coordinated federal strike. He knew an orphaned appraiser should not have the power to freeze international assets. He squeezed my throat, cutting off my air supply completely. Black spots began to dance at the edges of my vision. I did not thrash. I did not claw at his face. I simply gripped his wrists with both hands, staring directly into his manic, bloodshot eyes, letting him see my absolute defiance. I was going to watch his empire burn, even if I had to do it with my dying breath. Preston raised his right fist, pulling it back to strike my face, willing to ruin his own narrative just to inflict pain. Before his fist could swing forward, the heavy, soundproof mahogany doors of the VIP antechamber exploded inward. The force of the kick sent the brass handles crashing against the velvet wallpaper. Jamal stood in the doorway. As a highly successful African-American corporate attorney, Jamal usually navigated these spaces with calculated, flawless diplomacy. But right now, he looked like a general commanding a siege. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his stance wide and commanding. Flanking him on either side were two massive men in dark, tailored suits. They were not private security. The gold shields clipped to their belts caught the dim light of the crystal chandelier. "Federal agents." "Step away from her," Preston Jamal commanded, his voice echoing like thunder in the small room. "Now!" Preston froze. His fist remained suspended in the air. His eyes darted from Jamal to the federal badges on the agents' belts. The reality of his situation crashed over him like a tidal wave. Striking me in front of federal authorities would add a violent felony to his rapidly growing list of crimes. Slowly, his fingers uncurled from my throat. He took a hesitant, trembling step backward, raising his hands in the air to show he was unarmed. I slumped against the mahogany desk, gasping greedily for air. Oxygen flooded my burning lungs. I placed a hand against my throat, feeling the tender, bruised skin where his fingers had dug in, but my mind was crystal clear. Gloria pressed her back against the tufted leather sofa, her face entirely drained of color. "Jamal, what is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shaking violently. "Who are these men? Get them out of this private room immediately." Jamal did not even glance at his mother-in-law. He kept his eyes locked squarely on the man who had just tried to strangle a pregnant woman. "The Securities and Exchange Commission sends their regards," Preston Jamal said, stepping fully into the room. The agents moved in right behind him, their hands resting casually near their holstered weapons. We traced the wire transfers from the state senator's retirement account directly to the holding company that bought Kelsey's yacht. "Every single account tied to your name is currently under federal seizure." Preston stumbled backward, his legs hitting the edge of the glass coffee table. He looked at Jamal, then slowly turned his horrified gaze toward me. His mind was finally connecting the dots. He realized the timing of the asset freeze was not a coincidence. He realized my absolute lack of fear was not a bluff. "You Preston whispered, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. "You orchestrated this! You used him to get to the feds!" I pushed myself off the mahogany desk. I smoothed the wrinkled silk of my emerald gown, ensuring the fabric draped perfectly over my stomach. I reached up and carefully straightened my diamond drop earrings, ignoring the throbbing pain in my neck. I looked at the man who had tormented me, starved me, and tried to strip me of my humanity. "I didn't do anything, Preston," I said, my voice cold, steady, and utterly victorious. "I just blew the whistle." Preston opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He was completely cornered. The taller federal agent stepped forward, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities fraud," the agent stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. Preston shrank back, holding his hands up in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Wait," he begged, his polished facade entirely broken. "We can handle this quietly. Please, do not put those on me in here. 500 of my clients are right outside that door." I stepped around the glass coffee table, picking up my clutch. I walked right up to Preston, close enough to see the beads of terrified sweat forming on his forehead. I leaned in, dropping my voice to a sharp, commanding whisper. "They are not going to arrest you in here, Preston," I said. "That would be too private. That would let Gloria spin a narrative about a misunderstanding. We are doing this exactly the way you planned. We are going to the grand ballroom." Preston shook his head frantically, sheer panic overtaking his features. "No," he pleaded. "No, you cannot do that." I stepped back, turning toward the open doorway where the soaring notes of the string quartet were drifting in from the main foyer. "Now let's go out there," I instructed, delivering his death sentence with a flawless smile. "You have a speech to give." The walk from the dark VIP antechamber to the grand ballroom felt like a funeral procession. Preston moved like a man walking to his own execution. His tailored velvet tuxedo, which had looked so impeccable on the red carpet an hour ago, was now wrinkled and soaked with nervous sweat. The two federal agents stayed exactly 3 steps behind him, their hands resting near their hips. Jamal walked beside me, his presence a solid, unyielding wall of support. He had already signaled the tactical team waiting at the perimeter to lock down all the building exits. We entered the ballroom. 500 of the wealthiest investors, politicians, and business moguls in the Pacific Northwest sat at circular tables draped in white silk. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling light. The low hum of networking ceased the moment the string quartet stopped playing. A spotlight illuminated the main stage and the crystal podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," a booming voice echoed through the sound system. "Please welcome the senior managing partner of tonight's hosting firm, Preston." Thunderous applause erupted. These people trusted him. They had handed him the keys to their retirement funds and generational wealth. They clapped for a man they believed was expanding their empires. Preston dragged his feet up the carpeted steps. He gripped the edges of the crystal podium so hard his knuckles turned white. He leaned into the microphone. A sharp squeal of feedback pierced the room. "Good evening," Preston stammered. His voice was thin, reedy, and shaking. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. We have had a very challenging but ultimately successful quarter." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the back service doors. He was looking for the private medical orderlies he had hired. He was praying they would burst through with a straitjacket and drag me away, saving him from finishing this speech. But those doors remained firmly shut. Jamal had personally dismissed the corrupt contractors. Preston wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "As many of you know, my firm prides itself on protecting your legacies. We pride ourselves on security. But tonight, I have a very difficult personal announcement to make regarding my family." Even with federal agents breathing down his neck, his narcissistic delusion convinced him he could stick to the original plan. He actually thought he could declare me insane and use the ensuing chaos to slip out a side door and escape the country. I did not let him finish that sentence. I stepped out from the shadows of the stage wing. The rich emerald silk of my custom gown caught the glare of the spotlight. The audience murmured. I walked across the stage with absolute, unwavering confidence. My silver heels clicked rhythmically against the polished wood. Preston froze. He stared at me in sheer terror as I closed the distance between us. I did not ask for permission. I reached out and firmly pulled the microphone from his trembling fingers. "Thank you, Preston," I said, my voice echoing crystal clear across the silent ballroom. I turned to face the sea of billionaires and state senators. "Good evening, everyone." I continued, making deliberate eye contact with the most powerful people in the room. My husband wanted to announce tonight that I am suffering a sudden, severe mental breakdown. He paid a corrupt private psychiatrist $200,000 this afternoon to draft fraudulent medical conservatorship papers. He planned to have me forcibly committed to a psychiatric ward tonight right in front of all of you to discredit me. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. Gloria, sitting in the front row, dropped her jaw. The color completely drained from her aristocratic face. She gripped the edge of her table, looking around wildly, as if she could somehow command the crowd to stop listening to me. But they were captivated. I held the entire room in the palm of my hand. "He wanted you to think I was losing my mind," I stated, projecting my voice with lethal precision. "Because if you thought I was crazy, you would not believe a single word I had to say about his financial ledgers. But I assure you my mind is exceptionally clear. The only thing breaking down tonight is this firm." I turned my head slightly toward the back of the room. High up in the audio-visual booth, a technician I had hired hours ago stood ready. I gave him a single sharp nod. The massive digital projector screens hanging behind the stage flickered to life. These screens were originally programmed to display Preston's fabricated profit margins and glowing quarterly reports. Instead, the projection switched to a high-resolution split screen. On the left side of the massive displays, brilliant photographs illuminated the room. They were extreme close-ups of Gloria's prized art collection. My professional appraisal notes were overlaid in bright red text, pointing out the synthetic polymer paint, the artificial acid patinas, and the counterfeit canvas weaves. The word forgery was stamped across every single multi-million-dollar piece of art the family claimed to own. On the right side of the screens, the true devastation was revealed. These were not photographs. They were authenticated, decrypted wire transfer logs pulled directly from Preston's hidden Cayman Island servers. The crowd fell into a deadly, horrifying silence as the wealthy guests began to recognize their own names on the screen. They watched in real time as the digital ledger showed a $5 million withdrawal from a prominent tech CEO's retirement fund. A bright yellow arrow traced that exact $5 million routing through a shell company directly into an offshore account owned by Preston. The screen scrolled rapidly, displaying dozens of identical illegal transfers. I turned back to the microphone, letting the undeniable visual evidence burn into the retinas of every single investor in the room. "My husband has been running a massive Ponzi scheme to fund his mother's bankrupt estate," I announced. "Every masterpiece in their mansion is a cheap replica. Every dollar funding their luxury lifestyle was stolen directly from your private accounts." The silence in the grand ballroom snapped like a dry branch. The initial shock evaporated, replaced instantly by the furious, deafening roar of betrayed billionaires realizing their fortunes had vanished. I stood firm at the crystal podium, bathing in the absolute chaos I had just unleashed. Preston stumbled backward, covering his face with his hands. The trap had sprung, and there was absolutely no escape. The silence held for a fraction of a second before the grand ballroom detonated. The sheer volume of 500 betrayed billionaires erupting simultaneously sounded like a physical explosion. Chairs screeched violently against the polished hardwood floors as people leaped to their feet. A prominent tech CEO hurled his crystal champagne flute against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 glittering pieces. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Preston, screaming about his stolen retirement funds. A state senator, a man who had publicly endorsed this wealth management firm just an hour ago, charged toward the edge of the stage with a face flushed purple with absolute rage. He demanded his money back, his voice cracking with hysteria, as he realized his political war chest was empty. The private security team hired for the gala rushed forward to intervene, but Jamal raised his hand. The undercover federal agents positioned throughout the room stepped smoothly into the aisles, flashing their gold badges, effectively locking down the entire space. No one was leaving, and no one was going to save Preston. Preston was paralyzed. He shrank back against the heavy velvet curtains lining the back of the stage, completely incapable of defending himself. His million-dollar smile was gone, replaced by the gaping, open-mouthed terror of a man watching his life end in real time. But Gloria refused to surrender her kingdom quietly. The matriarch of the family snapped out of her paralyzed shock. She shoved her way through the panicking crowd, her diamond necklace flashing under the strobe lights of the audiovisual presentation still rotating on the massive screens above. She hiked up the skirt of her designer gown and stormed up the carpeted stairs of the stage. Her aristocratic face was contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged ferocity. She lunged toward me, her manicured hands curled into claws, desperate to rip the microphone away from my grip. "You lying gold digger!" Gloria shrieked, her voice cracking over the uproar of the crowd. "You ungrateful piece of orphan trash! You forged these documents. You hacked into our servers out of sheer psychotic jealousy because you will never belong in our world. Someone shut off those screens right now." I did not back away. I simply sidestepped her frantic lunge. I kept my grip firm on the heavy crystal podium and leaned directly into the microphone. My voice sliced through the deafening roar of the ballroom, amplified by the massive speakers, forcing every single person to hear the absolute truth. I looked down at Gloria, who was now stumbling to catch her balance on the stage, and delivered the fatal blow to her entire social existence. Gloria's entire estate was liquidated 3 years ago. I announced, my words echoing like gunfire over the frantic crowd. Every single multi-million-dollar masterpiece you have admired in her private study is a synthetic fake. I am a certified high-end appraiser, and I evaluated them myself. Her prized 1932 Picasso is a modern acrylic print. Her Renaissance bronzes are artificially patinated junk. You have been drinking $10 wine poured into $500 vintage bottles at her charity events. And the worst part is, she has been funding this pathetic hollow illusion using your own stolen retirement accounts. The crowd turned their furious gazes from Preston directly onto Gloria. The high society women who had worshipped her, the politicians who had dined at her table, now looked at her with sheer, undisguised revulsion. They realized they had been funding the very lavish lifestyle they had envied. Gloria collapsed onto her knees right there on the stage, her hands covering her face, completely destroyed by the public exposure she feared more than death itself. Her entire identity, built on status and superiority, evaporated into thin air. From the front row, a high-pitched, desperate shriek tore through the air. Kelsey, still wearing the shimmering silver dress ruined by the dark red wine Jamal had spilled on her earlier, jumped onto her chair. She looked utterly deranged, her hair wild and her face stained with running mascara. She could not accept the reality that the endless well of money had finally dried up. She screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a manicured finger at the crowd of angry investors. "You cannot do this to us!" Kelsey shrieked, her voice echoing with toxic entitlement. "We are a legacy family. We built this city. We have the best lawyers in the state. We are untouchable." Her delusions of grandeur were cut instantly short. Jamal stepped up onto the stage. He moved with absolute calm authority, a stark contrast to the hysterical family he had married into. He walked past Preston, who was now weeping openly against the velvet curtains. He walked past Gloria, who was sobbing on the floor. He went straight to the podium and gently took the microphone from my hand. He looked out at the furious sea of investors representing the ultimate voice of legal authority. As corporate counsel for this firm, Jamal stated, his deep, resonant voice instantly commanding the attention of the entire room. "I am officially advising all clients to freeze their assets with this institution immediately. The documents displayed on these screens are entirely authentic. I have already turned over the master ledgers to the federal authorities. Do not listen to a word these people say. The money is gone, and the criminal investigation is already underway." Jamal turned his head, slightly locking eyes with his wife, who was still standing on her chair in the front row. He delivered the final crushing reality check. And to be perfectly clear, Jamal added, his voice devoid of any sympathy. Kelsey's new $4 million yacht was purchased entirely with your stolen dividends. The outrage in the room intensified to a fever pitch. Investors began pulling out their phones, frantically dialing their own attorneys and bankers, desperate to salvage whatever scraps of their wealth remained. The beautiful orchestrated gala had transformed into a financial crime scene, and the architects of the fraud were trapped right in the center of it. But a cornered narcissist does not surrender. When the illusion shatters, they do not feel remorse. They go on the offensive. Preston pushed his way away from the heavy velvet curtains lining the back of the stage. The sheer volume of the angry investors seemed to jolt him out of his paralyzed state. He looked at the screaming politicians demanding their money. He looked at his mother Gloria weeping on the stage floor, in her ruined designer gown. He looked at Jamal standing tall alongside the federal agents blocking any chance of a quiet exit. Then his eyes locked onto me. The pure, unadulterated hatred radiating from his stare was visceral. He was completely stripped of his charming wealth manager persona. The monster I saw in the master bathroom, the man who had bruised my arms and tried to choke the life out of me in the VIP antechamber, had fully taken over. He marched toward this crystal podium. Jamal tensed, shifting his weight to intercept, but I held up my hand, signaling the attorney to stand down. I wanted Preston to speak. I wanted him to dig his grave so deep that no lawyer on earth could ever pull him out. Preston shoved past me, his shoulder hitting my arm hard, and grabbed the microphone from the stand. His knuckles were bone white, his chest heaving as he stared out at the furious mob. "Listen to me," Preston screamed. His voice boomed through the massive sound system, echoing violently over the chaos. "Everyone shut your mouths and listen to me right now." The sheer, desperate aggression in his tone caused a ripple of hesitation in the front rows. Wealthy elites were not used to being spoken to like disobedient children. The screaming subsided into an angry, restless murmur. Preston seized the opening. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "You are looking at a masterclass in extortion," Preston announced, his voice dripping with venom. "My wife is a penniless orphan who grew up bouncing between state-funded group homes. She has no family, no pedigree, and absolutely no money. I filed for divorce this morning because I caught her stealing from my mother. This entire presentation is a desperate psychotic fabrication created by a vindictive gold digger trying to extort a massive settlement out of my firm." The crowd shifted uneasily. Preston was a master manipulator, and he knew exactly how to play on the classist prejudices of the Seattle elite. "Do you honestly believe a high-end appraiser hacked into an international banking server?" Preston demanded, his confidence artificially inflating as he spoke. "She forged those ledgers. She faked those wire transfers using graphic design software. She wants to create a panic, so you all pull your funds, tanking my firm's valuation before the divorce proceedings begin. It is a pathetic, hysterical stunt from a deeply sick woman." A tech executive from the third row shouted back, pointing aggressively at the massive projector screens. "Then open your banking application right now. Preston, show us the Cayman accounts. Prove the money is sitting right where it should be." Preston flinched. The muscle in his jaw feathered rapidly. He could not open the app because the red federal seizure banners were still glaring on his screen. He knew he could not prove the funds were safe, so he pivoted to the only weapon he had left in his arsenal: pure, unadulterated financial intimidation. "I do not need to show you anything," Preston roared, gripping the microphone stand so hard it groaned. "I manage the grandfather's generation skipping trust. Do you understand what that means? We are a legacy family. That trust holds over $1 billion in liquid capital protected by blind clauses that even the federal government cannot easily pierce." He glared down at the state senator who had charged the stage earlier. "You want to sue me? Go ahead. Try it. I will unleash a legal team funded by $1 billion trust. I will drown you in discovery motions. I will tie up your corporate assets in civil litigation for the next 20 years. By the time my lawyers are done draining your accounts, your grandchildren will be paying off your legal fees. You think you can destroy me? I am the fortress. I control the capital. I am untouchable." The brazen threat sent a shockwave of cold reality through the investors. They knew exactly how the American legal system worked. A criminal investigation would take years, and a civil lawsuit against a billionaire trust fund could bankrupt the plaintiffs before they ever saw a single dime of their stolen money returned. Preston was betting that their fear of a grueling, endless legal war would buy him the time he needed to flee the country and hide behind international extradition laws. He turned his back on the crowd and faced me. The microphone picked up his heavy, ragged breathing. He thought he had regained the upper hand. He thought his grandfather's money made him an absolute god. "You failed, Bethany!" Preston hissed, his voice echoing through the ballroom speakers for everyone to hear. "You thought you could orchestrate a public takedown, but you are just a stupid girl playing a game you do not understand. I still hold the keys to the kingdom. You get nothing. You die in the gutter exactly where you belong." I stood perfectly still, letting his cruel, arrogant words wash over me. I did not flinch. I did not argue. I simply looked at him with an expression of profound, chilling pity. He was right about one thing. The grandfather's generation-skipping trust was an impenetrable legal fortress. It was designed to crush any external threat and protect the family wealth at all costs. But Preston had completely forgotten the internal defense mechanisms built into that very same document. He was so arrogant, so blinded by his own superiority, that he never realized the executioner was already inside the walls. I reached down and unclasped my sleek emerald evening clutch. Preston watched me, his eyes narrowing in sudden suspicion. He expected me to pull out a weapon or perhaps another piece of forged evidence. He braced himself, ready to scream for the federal agents to remove the dangerous, unstable woman from his stage. I did not pull out a weapon. I reached into the silk-lined interior of the clutch and withdrew a thick, folded stack of heavy parchment paper. I unfolded the documents with slow, deliberate precision. The crisp sound of the heavy paper smoothing out echoed sharply through the microphone. I took a step forward, invading his personal space, forcing him to look down at the papers in my hand. The top document was a high-resolution, blown-up print of the ultrasound I had received that very afternoon. Two distinct, unmistakable shapes were clearly visible against the dark medical background. Beneath the glossy medical image was a certified, notarized copy of the exact legal charter for the grandfather's generation-skipping trust. I had highlighted a specific, undeniable paragraph in bright, bleeding yellow ink. Preston stared at the ultrasound. His breathing stopped completely. The arrogant, victorious sneer on his face dissolved into an expression of absolute paralyzing horror. I raised my hand high and slapped the stack of documents violently onto the crystal podium right in front of him. The sharp smack echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. The sharp smack of the documents hitting the crystal podium echoed like a gunshot slicing through the angry murmurs in the grand ballroom. The room fell completely breathlessly silent. 500 of Seattle's wealthiest elites stared at the stage, utterly transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. Preston did not move. He stared down at the glossy black and white ultrasound print lying on the glass surface. The two distinct fetal shapes stared back at him, sealing his fate. His chest stopped moving. His lungs forgot how to pull in air. I watched the arrogant, untouchable king of the financial district crumble into a terrified, cornered animal. I leaned into the microphone, ensuring my voice reached the very back of the cavernous hall. Article 7, Section 4 of your grandfather's foundational charter. Preston, I announced, tapping my index finger directly onto the bright yellow highlighted text. Read it. Read the exact contingency your paranoid grandfather installed to prevent greedy sons from tearing the family empire apart over resources. Preston's lips parted, but only a dry, pathetic wheeze escaped. His eyes darted wildly across the legal parchment, scanning the dense legal jargon he had blindly assumed would always protect his supreme authority. I did not wait for him to find his voice. I translated the legalese for the captive audience. In the event of multiple heirs born of the same pregnancy, sole financial guardianship automatically and immediately transfers to the biological mother. The grandfather designed this specific clause to prevent any asset division or sibling rivalry manipulated by an unfit father. The transfer of power is absolute, instantaneous, and non-negotiable. I picked up the high-resolution ultrasound photograph and held it up high above my head, displaying it to the sea of investors, federal agents, and ruined family members. The flashing lights of the society photographers illuminated the image, projecting my victory into the lenses of the press. "It is twins, Preston!" I declared, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. "I do not just own your massive private debts from the Chicago syndicate. I do not just hold the deed to the waterfront mansion you forced me to live in. As of this exact second, under the ironclad rules of your own bloodline, I legally control 100% of your family trust. You have zero executive authority. You have zero access to the capital. You are officially penniless." The collective gasp from the audience sucked the oxygen right out of the room. The state senator who had charged the stage let out a booming, incredulous laugh. The sheer poetic justice of the moment washed over the angry mob. Preston had just threatened them with $1 billion legal war chest, boasting that his generational wealth made him an invincible fortress. Now they watched his own wife legally strip him of his armor with a single medical scan. He was entirely defenseless. The federal agents standing in the aisles shifted their stances, preparing for the inevitable fallout. Below the stage, Gloria let out a harrowing, guttural wail. She scrambled onto her knees, clutching the edge of the stage, her tear-streaked face ruined by running mascara. "No!" Gloria shrieked, slamming her fist against the wooden floorboards. "You cannot do this! That is our money! You are stealing our legacy! You belong in the gutter!" I glanced down at my former mother-in-law, my expression utterly devoid of pity. "Your legacy is a synthetic fraud, Gloria, and the only person going to the gutter tonight is the son you raised to be a thief. You handed me the bribe money to terminate this pregnancy today. You financed your own destruction." Preston finally broke. The reality of his absolute, inescapable ruin fractured his fragile, narcissistic mind. He had no offshore accounts. He had no private equity. He had no trust fund to shield him from the federal indictments currently hanging over his head. The beautiful, submissive orphan he had tortured, starved, and locked in a bedroom had meticulously dismantled his entire existence in less than 24 hours. He was going to federal prison, and he was going there with absolutely nothing to his name. The last shred of his polished wealth manager persona burned away, exposing the violent, abusive predator hiding underneath. His face turned a deep, mottled purple. Thick veins bulged against his neck and forehead. He let out a primal, unhinged roar that tore through his vocal cords. "You ruined me!" Preston screamed, lunging forward with blind, explosive speed. He did not care about the 500 witnesses. He did not care about the federal agents standing 20 feet away. He did not care about the society cameras capturing his every move. He only cared about destroying the woman who had bested him. He vaulted over the crystal podium, his large hands outstretched, aiming directly for my throat. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I stood my ground, staring death in the face, with absolute freezing calm. Before Preston's grasping fingers could even brush the silk of my emerald gown, a dark blur shot across the stage. Jamal moved with the explosive, calculated power of a defensive linebacker. The brilliant corporate attorney abandoned all professional decorum. He launched himself through the air, hitting Preston squarely in the chest mid-air. The sheer kinetic force of Jamal's tackle lifted Preston completely off his feet. The two men crashed violently onto the hard wooden stage boards. The impact shook the heavy velvet curtains and sent the crystal podium tipping precariously to the side. I stepped back smoothly, allowing the physical confrontation to unfold exactly as it needed to. Jamal did not hold back. He drove his knee brutally into the center of Preston's back, pinning the disgraced wealth manager, face down against the floor. He grabbed Preston's right arm, twisting it sharply upward, in a professional, inescapable submission hold. Preston thrashed wildly, screaming obscenities, his face smashing against the wooden planks. "You are done, Preston!" Jamal roared, applying more pressure to the shoulder joint until Preston let out a sharp howl of pain. "You lay a hand on her, and I will break your arm before the feds even read you your rights. Stay down." The 500 guests watched in absolute paralyzed horror. They had invested their life savings with a man who presented himself as the pinnacle of refined civilized wealth. Now they watched him thrash on the floor like a rabid animal, actively attempting to violently assault his own pregnant wife in front of a room full of federal authorities. His abusive nature was completely laid bare for the entire world to witness. He had no credibility left to salvage. Jamal placed his knee firmly into the center of Preston and his back. The disgraced wealth manager thrashed against the stage, gasping for air, his velvet tuxedo smeared with dust. The elite guests in the grand ballroom remained entirely paralyzed. No one dared intervene. They simply watched the man who robbed them squirming under the unrelenting grip of his brother-in-law. Then the sharp wail of sirens shattered the silence. The sound grew deafeningly loud, bouncing off the historic stone architecture outside. Red and blue emergency lights strobed through the windows. The heavy mahogany doors at the main entrance were violently kicked apart. 24 federal agents flooded into the venue. They moved with terrifying precision, fanning out across the aisles and securing every single perimeter exit in seconds. An FBI supervisor marched down the center aisle, ignoring the screaming investors. His eyes locked onto the stage. Jamal looked up, acknowledged the federal badge, and slowly released his submission hold. He stepped back, straightening his suit jacket, allowing authorities to take over. 2 agents hauled Preston up by his armpits. Preston collapsed, incapable of supporting his weight. A bright smear of crimson blood dripped from his busted lip, staining his pristine white collar. He looked absolutely pathetic. The agent slammed him face first against the heavy velvet curtains lining the back of the stage, kicking his feet apart. The click of handcuffs ratcheting around his wrists echoed through the microphone. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, mass embezzlement, and violations of the Securities Exchange Act," the lead agent stated, his voice a flat, uncompromising hammer. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." Preston squeezed his eyes shut, hot tears of absolute defeat streaming down his bruised face. He lost everything. The offshore accounts, the generational trust, the mansion, and his freedom incinerated. But the spectacle was far from over. Gloria, sobbing hysterically near the stage edge, scrambled to her feet. Refusing to accept reality, she marched directly toward the FBI supervisor. Her designer gown ripped at the hem, her diamond necklace sitting crooked. She raised her hand, furious. Her kingdom was being dismantled. "Unhand my son right this instant," Gloria shrieked, her voice cracking with unhinged authority. "Do you have any idea who we are? We own half the politicians in this room. I will have your badge for this." The supervisor did not blink. "Step back immediately," he warned, holding up a steady hand. She lunged forward and slapped the federal agent directly across the face. The sharp crack echoed loudly through the silent crowd. It was the worst mistake of her life. Before Gloria could lower her hand, 2 female agents tackled her to the ground. They did not care about her imported silk or high society status. They pinned her face down against the carpeted stairs, twisting her arms behind her back with brutal force. Gloria screamed like a banshee, thrashing wildly as steel cuffs clamped down tightly over her wrists, biting deeply into her skin. Her reign of terror over Seattle elite was finished permanently. "Gloria, you are under arrest for assaulting a federal officer," the supervisor announced, wiping blood from his cheek. "We are adding charges of complicity in wire fraud and possession of stolen assets. Enjoy federal custody." Gloria wailed, kicking her silver heels as agents dragged her upright. The matriarch who tormented me for 5 years was hauled away like a common criminal in front of the very people she spent her life trying to endlessly impress. In the front row, Kelsey comprehended the devastation. She collapsed out of her chair, landing hard on her knees. The shimmering silver dress ruined by red wine Jamal spilled earlier dragged across the floor. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. An SEC investigator stepped toward her, pulling a stack of warrants from his jacket. Kelsey looked up, trembling with pure fear, as the agent read her rights regarding the luxury purchases she eagerly flaunted. "We have a seizure warrant for a $4 million luxury yacht purchased under your name, alongside multiple accounts of receiving stolen property. You are facing significant prison time." Kelsey looked up, mascara running down her cheeks. She reached a shaking hand toward Jamal, who watched her breakdown with absolute indifference. Jamal. Please, Kelsey begged, choking on tears. You are my husband. You are a lawyer. You have to defend me. You have to fix this mess before they take me away. Jamal looked down at the woman who spent years mocking his integrity and squandering stolen money. I filed for divorce this morning, Kelsey. Jamal said, his voice entirely devoid of mercy. I am the one who handed your purchase agreements to the feds. I strongly suggest you find a public defender specializing in white-collar crime. You are going to need one. Jamal turned his back on her, severing the toxic tether permanently. I watched the scene unfold with deep satisfaction. I walked slowly across the stage, my emerald silk gown trailing elegantly behind me. I stopped right in front of Preston. He was kneeling on the floor, handcuffed, flanked by 2 agents waiting to transport him. Blood dripped slowly from his busted lip, staining his chin. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow, defeated, and completely empty. He had nothing left to say. I crouched down, meeting him exactly at eye level. I unzipped the heavy canvas duffel bag. I pulled out the thick stacks of $100 bills, $100,000 in untraceable cash. I did not hand it to him. I simply opened my hands and let the bundles fall. The stacks of money hit his chest, bouncing off his ruined tuxedo and scattering across the floorboards around his knees. He stared at the cash, bewildered by the gesture. I leaned in close, ensuring my voice was sharp and meant only for him. Here is some commissary money, I whispered. Buy yourself something nice. I stood up, leaving Preston kneeling among the scattered $100 bills. The 2 federal agents grabbed his arms and hauled him to his feet. He did not fight them anymore. The utter devastation of his reality had finally crushed whatever fight he had left in his body. I turned my back on him and walked down the stage stairs. The grand ballroom was a sea of flashing red and blue lights. The elite guests parted for me like the Red Sea, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and absolute awe. No one dared to speak to me. The federal agents began moving the prisoners toward the main exit. I followed at a slow, deliberate pace. By the time we reached the grand foyer of the Symphony Hall, the local news vans had already breached the perimeter. Jamal and Thorne had tipped off the press hours ago. This was not going to be a quiet, sealed indictment hidden behind expensive lawyers. It was going to be the front-page spectacle of the decade. The heavy glass doors swung open, and the cold Seattle night air rushed in, bringing with it the deafening shouts of dozens of reporters. Camera flashes exploded in a blinding, continuous wave. Preston was paraded out first, the golden boy of the Pacific Northwest financial sector, now looking like a ruined, disheveled criminal, kept his head down as microphones were shoved into his face. Gloria was dragged out next. She fought the female agents every step of the way, screaming obscenities at the reporters, demanding they stop filming her. Her frantic, unhinged behavior only fueled the paparazzi, cementing her new legacy as a hysterical fraud. Kelsey trailed behind them in tears, her ruined silver dress catching the harsh camera lights as she sobbed uncontrollably into her handcuffed wrists. I stood just inside the foyer, watching the ashes of their empire scatter in the wind. A dark-suited figure stepped up beside me. It was Richard Thorne. My attorney watched the spectacle outside with a quiet, deeply satisfied smile. We executed the takeover perfectly, Thorne said, his voice smooth and professional over the din of the crowd. The asset freezes are fully locked in across all federal jurisdictions. The Chicago Syndicate has officially transferred the deeds to your holding company. You own the estate, and the trust is currently transitioning into your sole guardianship. There is no legal maneuver they can pull to reverse this. I opened my sleek emerald clutch and pulled out the thick stack of papers Preston had thrown at me just yesterday morning. The marital dissolution agreement. He had demanded I sign it to protect his assets from me treating me like a disposable nuisance. Now the tables were entirely reversed. I pulled a simple black pen from my clutch. I did not need a gold-plated fountain pen to secure my freedom. I flipped to the final page and signed my name on the bottom line with absolute, unwavering certainty. I handed the heavy stack of papers to Thorne. File these first thing tomorrow morning, I instructed, my voice hard and clear. I want him legally excised from my life before he even has a chance to make bail. Thorne took the documents, slipping them into his heavy leather briefcase. It will be my absolute pleasure. Heavy footsteps approached from our right. Jamal walked over to us, looking utterly exhausted but deeply relieved. He carried a manila folder in his left hand. He watched through the glass doors as Kelsey was shoved into the back of a dark federal transport van. "You served her?" I asked, my voice carrying genuine respect for the difficult, ruthless choice he had to make tonight. Jamal nodded, his jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. "I had my associates draft the papers while we were standing in the ballroom. I officially filed for divorce, citing criminal fraud and massive financial deception. I also surrendered all of our joint accounts to the Securities and Exchange Commission for a full forensic audit to protect my own law license. She is entirely on her own now. She wanted to play the role of the untouchable legacy heir. Now she gets to experience the harsh reality of federal sentencing guidelines." Jamal turned to face me. The two of us had survived the exact same toxic ecosystem. We had both been viewed as outsiders, useful only for the aesthetic or the utility we provided to a family of arrogant parasites. We did not need to exchange emotional speeches or offer hollow apologies for the collateral damage. Jamal simply extended his right hand. I reached out and shook it firmly. It was a silent, profound acknowledgement of our flawless victory. We had burned the Viper's den to the ground, and we were walking away without a single burn mark on our professional records. "Take care of yourself, Bethany," Jamal said quietly over the noise of the sirens. "And take care of those babies. They are going to need a strong mother." "They already have one," I replied without a single shred of doubt. Jamal offered a small, genuine smile before turning and walking away, disappearing into the crowd of remaining guests and federal personnel. I turned my attention back to the glass doors. The transport vans were pulling away from the curb, their sirens wailing into the dark city skyline. The reporters began to scatter, chasing the vehicles down the avenue to get the first shots at the precinct. The screaming, the threats, and the suffocating arrogance of my former family vanished into the night. I pushed through the heavy doors and stepped out onto the red carpet. The cold wind whipped the silk of my emerald gown around my legs, but I did not shiver. I felt an overwhelming radiant warmth spreading through my chest. I walked down the steps, completely ignoring the lingering whispers of the society stragglers. I did not look back at the Grand Symphony Hall. I did not look back at the shattered remnants of Preston's life. My hired Maybach pulled up to the curb, its sleek black exterior gleaming under the streetlights. The chauffeur quickly opened the rear door for me. I stepped inside the quiet, luxurious cabin, and the heavy door clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the city completely. The driver smoothly accelerated away from the curb, merging into the late-night traffic. I leaned back into the plush leather seat and let out a long, slow exhale. I rested both of my hands gently over my stomach, feeling the slight reassuring firmness there. My children would be born into absolute security. They would never know the sting of a backhanded compliment or the terror of an empty bank account. I closed my eyes, rubbing my pregnant belly, feeling a profound and absolute peace. 6 months later, that profound and absolute peace had crystallized into an untouchable financial empire. I stood by the expansive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my ultra-modern penthouse office, looking out over the sprawling Seattle skyline. The morning sunlight caught the crisp gold lettering on the frosted glass double doors behind me: Vanguard Antiquities and Estate Valuation. In less than half a year, I had completely absorbed the legitimate remaining capital of the grandfather's generation skipping trust and built the most elite, ethically rigorous asset appraisal firm in the entire country. I was no longer a subservient wife evaluating forgotten relics in dusty basements just to hide my income. I was the sole executive dictating the global market value for billionaire estates. The heavy glass doors swung open and Jamal walked in. He looked sharper and more commanding than ever, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that perfectly matched his new elevated title. As my chief legal officer, Jamal had spent the last 6 months systematically dismantling every single fraudulent shell company Preston had ever created. He had worked hand in hand with the federal authorities, returning the stolen dividends to the defrauded investors while legally securing my absolute uncontested control over the family trust. We had sterilized the rot, purged the corruption, and built a massive fortress on top of the ashes. Jamal dropped a thick, leather-bound portfolio onto my polished mahogany desk. The Sterling estate liquidation is officially finalized. Bethany, he announced, a deeply satisfied smile playing on his lips. We secured the exclusive appraisal rights. That is a $40 million contract, and the SEC compliance checks are absolutely flawless. The board is thrilled. I turned away from this window, walking over to the desk to sign the final authorization. It feels incredibly good to build something monumental that does not require hiding in the shadows or operating through offshore shell companies, I replied, handing the heavy document back to him. Jamal took the folder, his eyes drifting toward the massive flat-screen television mounted on the far wall of my office. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver remote. "You are going to want to see this," he said, raising the volume. "The sentencing phase just concluded downtown." I crossed my arms and watched the high-definition screen. The local news anchor looked directly into the camera, her expression grave, but entirely captivated by the financial scandal of the decade. "We begin this morning with breaking news from the federal courthouse," the anchor stated, her voice filling the quiet luxury of my office. "The spectacular downfall of the city's most prominent wealth management family has reached its final devastating chapter. Former financial executive Preston has just been sentenced to 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole." The broadcast immediately cut to live footage shot just moments ago outside the courthouse steps. Preston emerged from the heavy steel double doors surrounded by armed federal marshals. He was no longer the charismatic, untouchable king of the financial district wearing custom velvet tuxedos. He wore a shapeless, bright orange prison jumpsuit. His hands, waist, and ankles were bound in heavy steel transport chains. His face was hollow, his cheekbones jutting out sharply. He had aged 10 years in the span of 6 months, his eyes darting nervously away from the blinding flashes of the press cameras. He looked like exactly what he was: a broken, powerless thief who had finally met his reckoning. The anchor continued detailing the rest of the familial destruction. His mother, Gloria, a former fixture of Seattle high society, has been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for her active complicity in the massive wire fraud scheme and for physically assaulting a federal officer. Sources inside the correctional facility report that she has been assigned to the prison laundry detail, working mandatory 8-hour shifts, washing the soiled uniforms of her fellow inmates. I let out a soft, cold laugh, feeling a surge of absolute vindication. The woman who had ruthlessly mocked my simple clothing, who had demanded I abort my children because I did not fit her aristocratic aesthetic, was now spending her golden years scrubbing stubborn stains out of cheap prison cotton under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. And finally, the anchor set a high society photograph of Kelsey flashing onto the screen. The sister of the disgraced executive, Kelsey avoided prison time by fully cooperating with federal investigators, but her personal assets were entirely seized by the government to pay mandatory restitution to the victims. She has officially declared total bankruptcy. Jamal pulled his smartphone from his pocket, swiped to a photograph sent by one of his private investigators, and handed the device to me. "Look at what bankruptcy looks like for a legacy heir who thought she was untouchable," he said. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was a candid, high-resolution shot taken through the greasy window of a fast food diner on the absolute outskirts of the city. Kelsey was standing behind the cash register. She was wearing a hideous mustard-yellow polyester uniform and a mandatory hairnet. She held a dirty wet rag in her hand, aggressively, wiping down a sticky Formica table, while a teenage shift manager yelled at her from the kitchen area. The arrogant woman who had flaunted a $100,000 diamond necklace and a $4 million yacht purchased with stolen money was now working for minimum wage, entirely stripped of the unearned wealth that had shielded her toxic, abusive arrogance. They got exactly what they deserved, I said, handing the phone back to Jamal. Before Jamal could respond, the side door of my office opened with a soft click. My private nanny, a warm and highly trained professional, wheeled a custom double bassinet into the room. "It is feeding time, Ms. Bethany," she whispered with a bright, comforting smile. Jamal gave me a respectful nod and stepped out of the office to handle the new contract, leaving me entirely alone with my children. I walked over to the bassinet and reached down into the soft blankets. I lifted my newborn twins, a boy and a girl, holding them securely and tightly against my chest. They were perfect. They were healthy, entirely untouched by the severe stress and the violence of the empire I had to burn down to protect them. I carried them over to the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows. The afternoon sun bathed the penthouse in a warm, radiant golden light. I looked down at the bustling, microscopic streets of Seattle, then down at the two beautiful faces resting peacefully against my shoulders. Growing up in the state foster system, I had never known what it felt like to have a safety net. I had been an orphan, a charity case, a prime target for people like Preston and Gloria, who truly believed their inherited wealth gave them the ultimate right to consume the weak. They thought I was easy prey. They never realized I was the apex predator waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike. I had taken their money. I had taken their freedom. I had taken their precious legacy and rewritten it entirely in my own name. I pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to each of my children's warm foreheads. They would never have to fight the brutal survival battles I fought. They would grow up in an impenetrable fortress built on absolute truth, protected by a mother who knew exactly how to dismantle monsters. I looked out at the endless skyline one last time. I was no longer the victim. I was the absolute, undisputed queen of my own empire. Bethany's journey teaches us that true power does not roar. It calculates in the silence. When trapped in a toxic ecosystem with manipulative abusers who underestimate your worth, your greatest weapon is quiet preparation. Instead of reacting emotionally to Preston and Gloria's cruelty, Bethany built an invisible fortress of financial independence and legal leverage. She proved that you do not need to fight every battle the moment it begins. Sometimes the most profound victories come from patiently letting your enemies dig their own graves while you quietly hold the shovel. Never rely on the people breaking you to save you. Have you ever been underestimated by toxic family members or forced to quietly rebuild your life while someone else tried to tear it down? Share your story of resilience in the comments below, because your survival might be the exact inspiration another woman needs to hear today. If Bethany's triumphant legal revenge resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of powerful women taking back their absolute worth.